Chair Mayron, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, I call to order the December 2021 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Thank you to those who are attending and joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom or via Zoom. Let me first welcome our student representatives for today. The first one is Gurtaran Johal and Sia Buttar. Thanks for both of you for attending and being with us today. The first item on our agenda is an item for action on the Twin Cities Campus Master Plan. We reviewed this item in October, but we will now tackle it again for action. And at this time, I would invite President Gable and Senior Vice President Franz to summarize the plan. President Gable, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chair Mayron, Vice Chair McMillan, and members of the committee. As part of the implementation of MPACT 2025, we committed to establishing long-term physical master plans for each campus that serve our communities and can be updated regularly. The Twin Cities campus initiated steps to be the first system campus to fulfill this component of MPACT 2025. And campus leaders have worked with the outside firm Sasaki Inc., which was selected as a result of a competitive bid process in May 2020, to help bring to you today a resolution to adopt the 2021 Twin Cities Master Plan. We're really delighted and proud of this work and its core focus on building a campus and not just individual facilities. We're excited with how the plan supports our commitments through MPACT 2025, as well as establishes a bold strategic long-term vision for the campus, one that is filled with support and possibility and ensures that our best days lie ahead. So I want to extend my really sincere thanks to Myron Franz, Mike Bertelsen, Leslie Kruger, Monique McKenzie, Andrew Kadek, and members of the team, as well as Greg Havens and the Sasaki team. And at this time, I'll turn it over to them for the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, this is Myron Franz, Senior Vice President, Finance and Operations. Thank you, Madam President, for your leadership in this process. Chair Mayron, Vice Chair McMillan, and members of the committee. As the President noted, there are many people to thank for this supporting this effort. This plan represents a comprehensive vision of the future of the Twin Cities campus. It is based on the team's best understanding of the needs for teaching, learning, research, and community collaboration. I'm excited about the opportunity to present this plan today. This plan is framed with a long-term 30-year vision and focused on actions in the near term over the next 10 years. The plan submitted for your approval today is printed in the docket materials, is 156 pages long, but it is filled with maps, pictures, and critical data. We began discussions around the plan last December and returned to you with updates in February, April, July, and October. Before we ask for questions and comments from the board, I want to provide an admittedly short summary of a very complex topic. First, we appreciate the guidance provided by the Board of Regents on the fundamental values and aspirations that set the course for the future of the Twin Cities campus. These values and aspirations were understood as principles that would shape the direction of the plan, and they were organized as a big ideas framework. The 10 big ideas and the supporting guidance are found in section 4 of the plan document. They are written to support future decision-making in a flexible way that ensures alignment with the university's strategic plan, MPACT 2025, and other strategic decisions. Second, the big ideas component of this plan inform the development of the land use, mobility, and sustainability frameworks in section 5 that provide systems-level guidance across the Twin Cities campus. This section will be important as implementation activity gets underway to support the direction outlined in the campus plan. Third, the recommendations for the East Bank, West Bank, and St. Paul are found in section 6. And those recommendations include detailed descriptions of key places and qualities are important investments for the future. They are heavily illustrated and detailed thanks to the tremendous work of our consultant team from Sasaki. Section 6 combines a more in-depth look at the specific initiatives and potential future improvements while maintaining consistency with the big ideas and strategic plan commitments. Fourth, the process of engaging with the campus community to develop a plan was just getting underway in February 2020 as the pandemic changed our engagement plans. Good planning practice typically relies on face-to-face input from members of our campus community. Without the opportunity to do so, the team relied on digital and virtual methods to connect. The team used surveys, a project website, and regular meetings with the campus plan advisory committee, which represented a diverse cross-section of the campus community. A number of meetings were conducted with Senate committees and other faculty governance and student advisory boards. Staff discussed the plan at various points in its evolution, attending multiple meetings hosted by neighborhood organizations and business associations as well. Fifth, the Twin Cities Campus Plan was developed in response to the campus planning principles approved by the Board of Regents in February 2021. Traditionally, campus master plans have addressed questions of growth, including land acquisition, capital renewal of existing assets, and interaction with our surrounding communities. These questions are all prioritized in support of the university's mission. As the world evolves, good practice campus planning principles have been revised to include references to sustainability, innovation, inclusion, and diversity. Student experience and fiscal stewardship directly related to the cost of attendance are powerful considerations for campus planning work throughout our system. And we have been directly addressed in the Twin Cities Campus Plan that you see before you. Sixth, once approved, the Twin Cities Campus Plan will be the launching point for many other planning and decision-making efforts. For example, within the board's reserved authority, the future 6-year capital plans will look to this plan to consider priorities and potential projects. Finally, at the staff level, many other efforts will continue and some will expand. A few examples include the advancement of public safety, both on campus and near campus with infrastructure and programs. Number 2, landscape management for campus open spaces. Number 3, student life facility planning and programs. And finally, number 4, operational plans to design and fund accessibility improvements to campus pathways and the Gopher Way. These are just some examples of what we will be doing at the staff level. Chair Mayron, Vice Chair McMillan, and members of the community, we appreciate your focus on this important effort over the last year as we set the course for the future of the Twin Cities campus. And at this time, we're prepared to ask or answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Franz. Before I ask for any questions or comments, is there a motion to recommend approval of the Twin Cities Campus Master Plan?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Then let's turn to discussion at this time. Any questions or comments by any of you participating in today's meeting?
Chair Mayron, we have Regent Powell here in the boardroom.
All right, thank you. Regent Powell?
Thank you, Chair Mayron. First, a comment. I just want to acknowledge and thank the team who've worked on this plan. I think it's visionary. It's really comprehensive, and also I appreciate that there's been a very deep consultative process. As this plan's come together, and to me, it seems apparent that as a result of that process, the plan really has gotten, if you will, deeper and better each time we see it, and with the different groups coming in and adding their views and consultations. So I just want to thank the team for producing such a comprehensive report. My question, my question has to do with how do we keep not only this board but future boards really connected and engaged with this plan, which it's hard to digest it all, and how do we keep connected? One suggestion is that we prioritize the very near term initiatives over the next 2 to 3 or 4 years, and that those begin to populate the 6-year capital plan. I mean, typically, I think the 6-year plan, in my experience, is there's a lot of renovation and there's HEAPR But I'm hoping that as a result of this plan, and which is a good plan, I hope that we're going to start to see many of the, particularly the pacing elements, show up in the 6-year capital plan so that we can see that we're actually taking action on this plan and starting to put in place the foundational elements. So that's a suggestion. I don't know if the team want to respond, but that's my comment.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senior Vice President Franz.
Madam Chair, Regent Powell, well, thank you for that comment, because I think one of the things that as we go forward, not just with the campus plan, but all the 2025 plan and metrics of the strategic plan, I think the way that we can help make those plans work and live, as you suggest, in a meaningful way to the board is to come back to the board in various capacities as these different plans go forward. In this particular case, you're right, the 6-year capital plan is one of those primary areas you will start to see this, but there'll be some other ones. I don't know if Vice President Burleson or Director McKenzie have any other suggestions.
Madam Chair and members, I agree. The 6-year plan is the most prevalent. And so that would be, but we were working on that over the summer. But we also update really every, the annual capital budgets are coming as well. And those are routine updates. So I think then there may be other pieces that make sense along the way. We know that other plans will be coming along to help turn this into more reality. So individual projects will make progress, as well as the next step. One of the next steps that'll be coming is to do a comprehensive utility and energy plan based upon this information. So I think there are a variety of things that are going to turn this into the next level of reality.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Chair Powell?
No, thank you, Chair Mayron.
All right. Mr. Langworthy, any other people in the boardroom who would like to speak?
No other speakers, Chair Mayron.
And anybody on Zoom? I'm not seeing anyone with a raised hand.
Correct. No one on Zoom either.
All right. Well, I just want to thank Senior Vice President Franz and everyone who worked on this. I think this is fantastic. It's far-reaching, it's strategic, it's visionary, it's very exciting, and I hope it's is the guiding force for us as we talk about how to plan for the Twin Cities campus. It certainly should be, and so I say kudos to all of you. With that, there being no further discussion, it appears that we are ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz and Mr. Bertelsen, everyone else. Thank you. Next up is the resolution related to the operating model for the Twin Cities campus dining program. We discussed this operating model in October, and today the final recommendation returns to us for review and action. I'll remind the committee that we should avoid discussing any of the non-public data that was provided by the General Counsel under an attorney-client privilege. We have Vice President Bertelsen here, joined by Director Amy Curran to present the resolution. Vice President Bertelsen, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair and Regents. Today we are here to request your review and action on a resolution related to the provision of dining services on the Twin Cities campus, including the core residential retail and catering program, concessions and catering and athletics venues, and retail and catering at the Landscape Arboretum. The resolution authorizes purchases of goods and services of $1 million and over, consistent with board policy. The purchase summaries appear on pages 167 and 168 of your docket. We have continued to engage with students since we last met to ensure that their priorities are reflected in the agreement with Chartwells and feel that we're in a good position in this area. This, of course, is in addition to the significant and ongoing student engagement throughout this 2-year process, including the Student Advisory Committee, a student member on the Management Committee, and consultation with student bodies this fall. In short, we believe the program presented will deliver the kind of dining experience that students want and provides avenues to ensure it remains responsive over the life of the contract. Contract administration staff are working closely with Airmark and Chartwells to ensure a smooth transition in the spring, pending your approval of this item. Thank you, Madam Chair. We stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Vice President Bertelsen. Before I ask for any questions or comments, I'd like to get a motion on the table. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to the operating model for the Twin Cities campus dining program?
I move adoption of the resolution.
Is there a second? Thank you. Let's now turn to discussion. Any questions, comments by my fellow regents? And
Chair
student
Mayron, Regent
representatives.
McMillan.
All right, thank you. Regent McMillan, proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you to the team for the engagement that's occurred and the engagement of the university community, the external world, the RFP. This one has been going on for a while, and I think it's been conducted thoughtfully and comprehensively given the circumstances under which it happened, starting and stopping in the middle of pandemics and so on. I have a question, and I think I can avoid getting into any detail that would be challenging under the attorney-client privilege memo, but this is a different financial model for how the university will recover some of these costs and then invest that money to pay for our staff. And I'm particularly looking at the way we'll buy the residential dining plans from Chartwell's, and then we put a price on them, and then some of that money comes back to us. And without using any specifics in terms of that money, how much, that feels like there's a little bit of an inherent conflict with, and I don't think there is, and this is my question, help me appreciate that there isn't. And the natural tendency would be to add as much to that as we can so that we've got more money to work with, more money to pay students who help us in the dining rooms, more money to do all the things we need to do. But at the same time, if we ask for more money, we're raising the total cost of attendance for students. So that's something that wasn't present in prior dining plans. Can you speak to that a little bit without getting afoul of where we're not supposed to talk publicly about this, given it's not done?
Sure, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Regent McMillan and Regents. Yes, there is for residential dining, the financial pattern is a little bit different. It's we're moving to something I think is more traditional and more common in the market. But it does change the pattern a little bit. I mean, I think one of the things that's important to remind for all of us is that our housing dining rates are, 12th or 13th in the Big Ten of the 14 members already. So we're starting at a very cost effective and very paying attention to the cost of attendance has always been a very central part of what we do. And this model will continue that. I mean, I think it's important to know that the rates that we propose for students will still come back to the board. That's something that you approve on an annual basis as part of the rate plan. So that doesn't happen quietly. That happens in a very transparent and public way with board review. And we certainly pay attention to cost of attendance as part of that overall picture. The resources that the differential between what we pay would pay the contractor for their costs, is a cost recovery largely. And the marginal difference is what we choose to maintain for capital investment and dollars that go right back into the dining program to help make it a more positive experience for students and the campus. So that's the margin. That's what we will always be paying attention to. And those are the items that would come back here as part of a capital investment and also as part of the rate development. It does give us a little bit more control over the overall program, but it's not dissimilar. Currently and in the future, we work very closely with the contractor on helping set both the quality and the price for all those items. I don't know if there's anything I missed. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any follow-up, Regent McMillan?
No, that covers it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Regent Farnsworth, you had a question or a comment?
Thank you, Chair Mayron. And really just to comment, I was going to feel remiss if I didn't comment on this momentous day. I've been involved in this since 2016. There's been a lot of other students who have worked on dining related issues way before this, and just wanted to echo what Vice President Bertelsen was saying around the consultative nature of this process. very extensive with students in particular, but all other university stakeholders. So I just want to thank President Gable, University Services, Contract Administration, both of you. I bet you're extremely happy to get it to this point. And of course, there's more work to be done. But this feels like the right approach, obviously not expecting as we got into this that something called COVID-19 would happen and impact this significantly. But this seems like the right approach, and just really appreciate your work. And I remember working with some members of this board, like Regent McMillan and others, as a student on this. So I'm just wanted to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the next steps on this. Thank you, Chair Mayron.
Thank you very much, Regent Farnsworth. Our next person is Student Representative Joe Hall.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, members of the board, VP Bertelsen, and Amy Cran. I just want to echo everything that Regent Farnsworth and other members of the board have stated in terms of ensuring that student perspectives have been included throughout the RFP process, but also throughout the past few months since the proposal has been brought forward to the board. It does not go unseen how responsive university services have been ensuring that the student voice is included, and especially looking at the purchase of goods and services, seeing how student priorities, which include inclusive dietary options, better food quality, funding for food insecurity efforts, better business ethics and social responsibility have all been included. And so we look forward to ensuring that all of these aspects continue to be included in the ultimate contract that gets signed, and ensuring that student needs are met in an equitable manner. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Student Representative Joe Hall. Regent Hipsch.
Thank you, Regent Mayron and Vice President. You mentioned that it's a common, more common model in a lot of institutions. Did you get feedback from institutions that have had this model for a while, and what was their reaction?
Chair Mayron and Regent Hipsch, I think each program has some slightly different risk and reward benefits and things you have to pay attention to in the program. I know that Director Karen and her team have certainly talked to multiple other institutions and across the country about how they program it, how they build those programs, what they built into the contracts. Those all have been part of the contract negotiations, as well as General Counsel has in the process hired outside counsel to help us, who have a lot of national experience building these kind of contracts, to make sure the university is best situated for how to manage this particular setup and how to make sure it serves the institution well. So I think generally very positive, and I think just we're always paying attention to how we learn from others and how to make sure we're building in best practices in our activities.
Very good, thank you.
Any follow-up, Regent Hipsch?
No, thank you.
All right. I've been told by Mr. Langworthy that there are no other speakers, unless somebody would like to speak, either who's on Zoom or in the boardroom. All right, seeing none, hearing of none, then it appears that we are ready to vote. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much. Our third item is the first of two updates related to MPAC 2025 system-wide strategic plan. Senior Vice President Franz and Associate Vice President Volna are now going to take us through this item, focusing on innovative financing options. Senior Vice President Franz, if you could take it away.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. The discussion of capital debt financing strategies, as Chair Mayron mentioned, is the first topic up today. The first of two plan updates we want to provide today. But before we discuss the innovative financing strategies plan, I want to mention the other plans listed in your docket information summary. There are 4 plans listed there. All 4 plans listed are part of Commitment 5, Fiscal Stewardship. The chancellors from each campus and I, as Senior Vice President, are designated as the leadership owners for all 4 plans. And in addition, Vice President Go is designated for the Campus Safety Plan. The Enterprise Risk Management Plan will be discussed later today as docket item agenda number 5. There are two other plans listed. They will be discussed in more detail at future board meetings. The other two plans are assess and improve campus safety and land retention, acquisition, and use strategy. But let's turn now to the innovative financing strategies planned in our discussion today. We're here today to talk about some new financing strategies that have been developed to give the university more tools for addressing the capital needs of the university. Over the past 10 years, our capital financing program has been very successful in managing the debt portfolio prudently and keeping the cost of funds very low. In no small part to the gentleman sitting at the table, Associate Vice President Mike Volna. Despite that, the university and the state are falling behind in investing in capital asset preservation and renewing our capital assets. You should note that in 1998, the University of Minnesota, their bonding request was that was awarded was $138 million. That was about 15% of the state bonding bill. In 2020, the university received $75 million, which was about 5.5% of the state's bonding bill. Now, in addition, the size of the state bonding bill has not really increased much over the last 20 years to keep up with inflation. So to address this ongoing need, Impact 2025 challenges and calls on us to develop and propose creative financing solutions that meet our strategic objectives while keeping the cost of attendance low and not adding pressure to the operating budget. Very simple assignment. The capital financing plans we are here to discuss today have been developed by a group of university financial experts, leaders, chancellors, and leverages our success in issuing and managing debt, our outstanding credit ratings, and our excellent at managing cash and investments. The plan is not intended to replace the state's support for investment. On the contrary, the elements of the plan work together to expand financing for capital projects that support the university's strategic goals, and each is tailored to specific capital financing needs. And finally, in light of the very favorable state forecast that was issued last week that we'll be discussing in more detail in a few minutes, we have decided that the university will not be advancing the capital renewal debt financing item, which is in this plan we'll discuss shortly, but we want to make sure that it's included as a tool for us in the future to consider. So what we want to make sure we do today in this discussion item is to present the board for the first time some of these creative financing opportunities and alternatives that we may come to the board in the future to act on. So I'd like to ask Associate Vice President Mike Volna to walk through the presentation, if that's all right, Chair Mayron.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Vice President Volna.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, Senior Vice President Franz, members of the board, appreciate it. We're excited today to talk to you about this plan. Quite simply, the reason that we've been asked to develop this plan is because, as Senior Vice President Franz indicated, the needs that the institution has to preserve, maintain, and renew its capital assets exceed the resources that we have been able to get from the state and from other sources. So this plan provides us with some innovative tools and some approaches that we will propose. The plan addresses the need for additional resources. It creates nimbleness and flexibility in the way that we would use these tools. As Myron said, it minimizes the impact on the operating budget, and it manages all of the associated risks with this very effectively. There are risks in any financing plan, but this is not a risky plan, and we manage those risks appropriately. So let's start just for a moment with the current financing program that we had. As Senior Vice President Franz indicated, we've had a debt financing plan in place for decades, and it's been quite effective. Some of the strengths of our plan today are that we have a $1.5 billion portfolio. It is very well managed. It has a strong rating from the credit agencies, AA1 from Moody's, which is one notch below AAA, and a AA from S&P, which is two notches below AAA. Our weighted cost of capital is an almost unheard of 2.6%. What that means is if you take all of our debt and blend it together, the average interest that we pay on that debt is 2.6%. So the plan today is very effective, but it's not helping us meet the needs for additional resources to address the needs that we have. If you look at the way that we currently finance and spend our capital needs, there's really three buckets that I've mentioned here on this slide. First one is our debt financing program that I just talked about. As I said, we have a $1.5 billion debt portfolio. On average, we spend about $63.4 million a year in capital out of that source of funds, averaged over the last 5 years. The next bucket that we have is HEAPR, Higher Education Asset Preservation and Renewal. That's a program that the state provides whereby they issue their bonds for these types of needs, and they give the proceeds to the University of Minnesota, Minnesota State Colleges, and so forth. We have asked for $200 million per year for each of the last 5 sessions that we've asked for a bonding bill. And over those last 5 requests, our average has been $20.8 million. And to put that in some context, if you look at our $5.2 billion deferred renewal and maintenance needs, and if that dollar amount never went up, it would take us 250 years at $20.8 million a year to get through our needs. It's simply not enough. And the third bucket that we have is our repair and replacement, which is just part of our operating budget. And what happens is as there are pressures on the debt financing and on the HEAPR, that trickles down to the operating repair and replacement budget so that we end up using that for things that really we'd like to use HEAPR on. It's important to understand then that the items that we're going to talk about here really focus on the debt financing bucket and the HEAPR bucket. And the items that we're going to talk about are not sort of necessarily an either or. The strategies can work together and in fact do work together and are designed to be complementary and in sum total will benefit the institution both in terms of quantity of assets, nimbleness, and so forth. So in the overall plan that we were asked to prepare for Impact 2025, one of the very first items we said is we wanted to refresh and reset our debt capacity. Now, every year when we do our annual debt financing report to the board, we provide a slide that talks about what our debt capacity is. And this is the slide that you've seen in the past, updated through September of this past year. The plan committed that we would actually commission a separate study by an outside advisory firm. We did that. They delivered their report last week, so we did not have an opportunity to get that in here. I believe in October, Regent Spigum asked me what the number was for our capacity, and I think I said it was about 400 million, give or take 100 million. Janney Montgomery Scott, the firm that we commissioned out of New York to do our study, has given us their report, which indicates that if we want to keep our AA1 rating and not sort of compromise and slide down, they believe our debt capacity today is more like $900 million to $1 billion. They also said if you, for whatever reason, had a fantastic strategy and you were willing to sort of slide down one notch for the additional capacity, that would generate, then you'd be at about 1.75 billion to 2 billion in debt capacity. So if you just think about sort of the things that go into making up how much debt we probably could issue, we have plenty of capacity. But the thing that it's important for you to understand is there's really another piece of capacity, which is how are you going to pay it back? And quite frankly, when we go and talk to rating agencies about any particular debt issuance or about our debt program, they focus on 2 things. They focus on what's our strategy for issuing debt and using it, and what's our ability to pay it back. So please keep in mind that although we have probably double what this slide shows, we still need to have a prudent plan for paying it back if we issue it.
Madam Chair, could I interrupt? Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, thank you. Mike, if we were to look at it as you have presented with additional debt capacity potential and being willing to slide down one notch in our bond rating with Moody's or whatever the other group is, that would cost us more money though, right? I mean, there's an offset. The interest rate that is charged to us would go up.
Chair Mayor, Regent Spigen, that's absolutely correct. I'm not suggesting we should slide down. In fact, I would advise that we not slide down.
Good.
There's a reputational risk as well as the cost. When you go down to a lower rated debt, what that means is that the credit markets look at you as more risky. And so they're going to charge you more in interest for that risk.
I just wanted to clarify that.
That is correct. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep. So the next piece of this plan that 2 weeks ago we were planning on proposing to you as part of our request to the state was an innovative, what we called an innovative capital renewal program. I still want you to be aware of it, and we still may come back and say that this makes sense. But given the recent sort of unbelievable forecast from the state, senior leadership made the decision that it was best to keep this in our back pocket and let's ask the state to fully fund what we think we need for HEAPR. This strategy really is a HEAPR-like strategy. There are a couple pieces to the proposal. So, and we wouldn't do this sort of one after the other, we would do it all together. But what we would do is, upon agreement with the state, we would propose that we would issue some number. In this case, it was $500 million of our debt. We would use those dollars like we use HEAPR today. It wouldn't be a replacement for HEAPR, it would be a supplement to HEAPR, but we would use it for the same types of things that we don't have the money for today. 500 million would be about 10% of our needs, so that's a real impact. We would also request the state to provide us with an annual appropriation. We calculated that for 500 million, it would be about 35 million a year for 25 years to pay the debt service. And we further would propose that the state counted against their credit capacity rather than our credit capacity. In a minute, I'll show you how this is not an unprecedented thing. We already do this, but I just wanted to make sure you understood the elements of this. The benefits of this, like I said a moment ago, about 10% of our needs would be immediately addressable through a strategy of this size. It leverages our current our ability to issue debt. We already have the tools and the people and the strengths to issue our own debt and manage our own debt. It does mirror the programs that we currently have with the state for the stadium and the biomedical discovery district. And I'll talk about those in just a minute. And it preserves our capacity then to issue our own debt for other things without having the state's pledge to us count against our credit capacity. As I said, we already do this. We started this program in 2006 at the time with TCF Bank Stadium. The state is paying for a chunk of it, 55% of the stadium costs were funded by the state of Minnesota. They're giving us an appropriation that at its peak was 10.25 million a year. And that appropriation started in 2008 and will go for 25 years. So if you do the math, it's about 2032, I believe, 2033, that the last appropriation will come in. Similarly, then shortly after we did that, we were able to work with the state to develop the biomedical discovery district legislation. And that was a similar deal. In this case, they're paying for 75% of the cost of 4 new research buildings, the ones that you can see around the outside of TCF or Huntington Bank Stadium. We again issued our own debt. We issued it against their credit. They're paying the debt service for their portion to us through an appropriation. Because that was 4 buildings that ramped in over a period of time, that actually the appropriation goes for longer than 25 years, but each amount of appropriation is tagged to a building and is given to us for 25 years after we issued the debt for that building. So it's quite a long program. It began in 2010 and it'll go well into the 2030s. This is the model that we would propose to use with any kind of a capital renewal program that we would approach the state on. So I will stop there first before I move on to the next idea, see if anybody has any questions.
right, any questions? Give a minute or so. Let's see, Mr. Langworthy, if you're picking up anything, let me check on the raised hands. Anybody have any?
Chair Mayron, sorry, Chair Mayron, Regent Hipsch and Regent Powell.
All right, Regent Hipsch?
Thank you, Regent Mayor. Question, love this idea. I think it's great. So, how, so it has to be approved by the state, obviously. So I just talked through we just got announced earlier this week that we're looking at like 3 interest rate changes this year and 3 next year. And so how fast can this get done? And we're putting a lot of emphasis on the state legislature to help us with this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Chair Mayron,
Yes.
Chair Mayron and Regent Hipsch. I think part of the challenge is, as you said, we're in a really dynamic period right now, both obviously in terms of the budgetary situation of the state, but also in the climate of the inflationary situation we're in now. So one of our goals for the request we'll be talking about a little bit later today about the supplemental budget request is to seek this additional funding immediately, as in this 2022 session, so that we can employ these funds as soon as possible. The sooner we employ these funds, the sooner we can lock down some of these costs and avoid some of the long-term construction costs that we know are going up right now. So our goal would be to try to implement the strategy in the supplemental budget request to ask for the additional capital renewal money or HEAPR money in the 2022 session and employ those funds immediately. But believe you me, the team out there is ready to, we have a lot of shovel-ready projects ready to go.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Regent Mayron, Chair Powell.
Chair Powell?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Mayron. So this is can we have our cake and eat it too? I understand, the importance of HEAPR, and I guess the question is there flexibility sort of within this idea to also open up a little bit of capacity for strategic and mission-oriented investment? Because, I know the importance of HEAPR, and I don't want to fall off that, but would this give us room to maneuver on a few additional investments that either strengthen the student experience or strengthen our research capacity? Because those tend to be, enrollment builders, revenue builders. We need those, and we need them in the mix. And to the degree that we could accelerate those, it's really helpful.
Senior Vice President Franz or Associate Vice President Volno?
Chair Mayor, and I'll take that one, Regent Powell. I think that to the extent that this particular element of the plan can maintain, preserve, and strengthen some of our physical assets that support students, that support teaching, that support research, absolutely there's a use for it towards that. You cannot use debt proceeds for operations. There's a board policy prohibition on that, as well as some tax rules. So we'd have to be thoughtful about using it for operations. But clearly, any sort of capital asset that we have or that we need that supports those things would clearly be something we would want to focus on.
All right, thank you.
All right. Mr. Langworthy, right now we have no one else wanting to ask questions. Is that right?
That is correct, Chair Mayron.
All right, then Associate Vice President Volno, you want to continue with your presentation on the Century bonds?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Mayron. So the next piece of it is probably the most innovative piece of the puzzle here. We're calling it the Century Bond Strategy. And I don't know how many of you know what a Century Bond is. The strategy in itself has 3 parts to it, and you can see it here on the screen. There's the debt instrument itself called a Century Bond. There's the internal bank aspect of it, and there's the principal repayments reserve strategy. Each of those not only serve to function as a way to operate this efficiently, but to manage some of the risks associated in it. So I will talk about each one of these pieces separately. The first piece I'll talk about is what the Century Bond is itself. They call it a century bond because it's a bond that is issued for 100 years. Whereas you may have a 30-year mortgage or a 5-year car loan, or we issue our debt normally for 25 years. In this case, you literally issue a bond or bonds for 100 years. During that time, for 99 years, you pay interest only. And in the last year, the 100th year, you have to come up with the principal to pay it back. That's why they call it a century bond, because it takes you 100 years that's ultimately to pay it off. There are many people that have looked at this and said, well, why would you pay on something for 100 years when there's no asset you could buy or build with it that would last 100 years? And that's true. And if we use it that way, that is absolutely a bad use for it. So the internal bank piece that I'll talk about next is what makes this so attractive. And the internal bank strategy is really the internal lending component of it, okay? I'll talk about that right now. So in this part of the strategy, what you do is you issue the bonds, you take the proceeds, you know that you have to pay interest for 100 years. You put them into what you call an internal loan fund, an internal bank, a central bank. There are many sort of names used for that by institutions. But essentially what it is it's a mechanism that you use to hold the money until you have a capital project that you want to spend it on. Then you apply it to that capital project, just like we do today. And you set up a repayment plan with the college, the campus, or whatever, just like we do today. The difference with what we do today is that whereas today when we issue debt, a college or a campus will pay us back both principal and interest, and then we pay that to the outside bondholders. With this internal bank strategy, you're only paying the external interest to the bondholders. So when a college, campus, unit, administrative unit, IT, whatever it is, pays us back the principal, we put that back in the central bank, and then at some future point, we lend it to another project, and we go through the same process. And so if you think about a number, pick any number, 100 million, 400 million that you would issue this for, and if you amortized it each time over 25 years like we do today, you would essentially get to use that money 4 times in 100 years. So you create essentially 4 times your capacity to make loans for one issuance. The third element of this strategy is what's called the principal payment reserve component. And what this is the fact that in 100 years, you have to pay it back. And so what every organization that has issued one of these has done is they have taken a small amount of money, they do some math called present value math, and you figure out what you need to put aside today in your endowment so that it will grow to the number you need in 100 years. And in this example here, a $400 million century bond, you would put away $5 million today. And at 4.5% return, which is quite a bit below our current rate of return that we're getting on the endowment over a 20-year cycle, it would grow in 100 years to $400 million. And as long as you manage that and set it aside and don't touch it, you have taken care of worrying about how to pay this back in 100 years. Now, what this model was actually put together by our advisors, Janney Montgomery Scott, and they actually have 2 pieces to this element. They say you budget and set the amount at what you think is your conservative number. In this case, they used 4.5%. But you know that your endowment really generates more than that. In this example, they said, let's say it's 6.5%. So if you put away 5 million at 4.5%, you're pretty sure you'll get it unless something unbelievably catastrophic happens. The more likely scenario is you'll get 6.5%, and what you end up with in 100 years is more like $1.2 billion. So it's not only a principal repayment strategy, but it's a seed fund for the future. There's a couple risks with this part of the element that we think we manage very well. One is that you have to make sure that you can earn what you think you will need to earn to get you there. And so that's why you pick a number that's very prudently. And I think the other risk is that, frankly, in 25 or 50 years, some future board or some future senior leadership team looks at this pot of money and says, what is that there for? We have 50 more years, we'll be fine. and they take some of it and they use it, and then you have to worry about what you're going to do with the principal. I don't think that's a problem for us right now because I think board policy and our senior leadership administrative policies provide ample coverage for that. But that is clearly, when you're talking about a 100-year horizon, you do have to think about those kinds of things. I don't want to leave you with that because I think on the other hand, what I want you to understand is that this is not new to us and this is not risky from our perspective. This plan in total that we've talked about has elements of things we already do today and things we already have in place and manage well. As I said, we have a $1.5 billion debt management program, and we manage that debt very well by evidence of the credit rating we have and the very favorable interest rates that we have. We have a best-in-class investment and banking team that manages our endowment extremely well. We have a mature capital and facilities program, the 6-year plan and so forth, that does a very good job of identifying our needs and deploying capital to those things. And we have a very strong compliance framework through all of the organizations and units inside the university that help us to maintain our compliance with debt and interest rates and all that stuff. We have national leading advisors, PFM and Janney Montgomery Scott, that help us on this stuff and provide advice to us. And frankly, we have a strong board policy and a very strong oversight framework, I think, to manage this. So in conclusion, what we think really this plan does is it gives us some opportunities. First and foremost, it's an opportunity for us to provide resources that we desperately need. By doing that, it allows us to lock in historically low interest rates. Regent Hipsch pointed out that people are talking about interest rates going up several times in the next 6 to 9 months. That would definitely have an impact on a century bond because you want to lock in the lowest rate you can for 100 years. By doing that, it reduces the variability of future financing costs and keeps costs low for units as they need these dollars for capital projects. It expands our availability for more money for capital projects. The century bond gives us nimbleness because whereas today, every time we issue debt for 25 years, we have to go to Wall Street, we have to go to the markets, we have to get rated. In this scenario, we could issue it from the central bank in a matter of days as opposed to months. And it really does leverage the earnings power and the capacity and the skill sets we have with our endowment. So with that, I will stand for questions. I would note that afterwards, after this slide deck, there are a few extra slides that show you some other schools that have done this. The ones in green on that are the public schools that have done this. You'll recognize many of those names. There's also some examples of how other schools have implemented various aspects of this prudently.
Thank you very much, Associate Vice President Volno and Senior Vice President Franz, for this very interesting presentation. I'm going to open it up for discussion. One question I have, and that is this on the century bonds. I understand you're bringing this to us to educate us for something that we might want to do in the future. Seems to me with the prediction on what's about to happen with interest rates, with the Federal Reserve talking about raising them 3 times over the next year, is there a thinking that we may want to act on the century bond concept sooner rather than later?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, sure. The concern is, and you're exactly right, the changing dynamic interest climate we have right now. The window is in fact closing to the extent that Associate Vice President Volno describes the opportunity up now is to lock in these rates. And as they go up, you don't want to lock in high rates for 100 years, clearly. So we do have a limited window. And what we will be doing over the course of the next weeks is analyzing with our financial advisors and watching the market changes that occur, because we may come back to you very shortly and say, recommend that we do engage in this century bond proposal, and we do it sooner rather than later. And obviously we'll work with the board to come forward if that's the case, but we do have a potentially very limited window here. Our best guess is that the window is closing, and it could be a matter of weeks or months. Vice President Volno, what do you think?
Yes, if I think about the sort of the timeline it takes to issue debt and when we would want to try and be in the market to avoid as much of that, my mind goes to about June. So if I work backwards from there, that would suggest to me that we need to be back here talking to you or seeking some sort of approval in the January, February, March timeframe. Assuming that there's review 1 month, action the next, we would want to sequence it so that we have all the board approvals and you're comfortable with both the concept and the projects that would be funded, and can get that done and give us the time to have these bonds issued by about June.
Thank you. Associate Vice President Volno. Any questions or discussion about what we just heard? Very exciting concepts for addressing what appears to be a diminishing return from the legislature, and obviously with the pressures to keep tuition down, trying to find creative ways to keep going.
Chair Mayron, Regent Powell.
All right.
Just a
Paul?
Just a comment, Chair Mayron, thank you. And I just wanted to thank you, Chair Mayron and Vice Chair McMillan. I know that you have both worked very closely with Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Volna to develop this idea, both of these ideas that I think in a way arose as a result of questions that Regent Swigum asked, last summer. And I think they're really, really exciting. I like them both. We've got a solid balance sheet that we're not really fully utilizing. And these are great opportunities. And I'd just like to thank the folks who've developed these ideas for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Any other comments or questions by the rest of the regents or student representative about this creative financing?
Chair Mayron, Regent Hipsch.
All right, Regent Hipsch.
Hi, Chair. Thanks, Chair Mayor. And I have to concur with Regent. What's your name again? Chair Powell. Anyways, Chair Powell on that. I really believe that this is going to get us to the best area that we need to be. And I'd like to see us do both of these, and I'd like to see us be as aggressive as possible in the next few months, knowing interest rates are going to go up. So we need to replace this heaper, and we need to do it fast. So.
Thank you, Regent Hipsch. Vice Chair Powell, Swigum, you're up next.
Oh, Madam Chair, thank you. Following up on Regent. I got him for you, Paul. I got him. He doesn't say. Thank you. Following up on Regent Hip, I forgot what I was going to ask now. I just wanted this Regent Hip a little bit. I think my question focused in on, I like creative financing a lot. I especially like it from our end. Put ourselves on the other end of the ask. Suppose you were the legislator in charge of the capital investment bill. Tell me why you would want to use your debt capacity, which I think you just mentioned, and why you would want a $35 million, in this example, recurring commitment for 25 years. Why wouldn't I just take that off the 680 million we already give you to the university? I like creative from our standpoint. Will the legislature see it as being creative or using them?
I would turn to
tackle that question.
Madam Chair, I would like to handle that question, Regent Swigum. I think it's a creative opportunity because, and that I think the legislature could react very positively, because what we're doing in effect is providing more access to bonding dollars to other agencies and other entities that don't have the capacity to issue debt like we do. So we're uniquely situated in the bonding bill, excuse me. And so that opportunity really, so instead of us getting $200 million, let's say in this next year, we get the $35 million over 25 years. That frees up that bonding capacity each year for other agencies, other opportunities, and we can leverage the borrowing capacity of the university. So it really does, it's leveraging the university's ability to issue debt that provides that opportunity, I think would be favorably received.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. Any follow-up, Vice Chair Stigum?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Any
Chair
other?
Mayron,
Yes,
Chair Mayron, Regent McMillan.
all right. Regent McMillan, please.
Thanks, Chair Mayron, and I can echo without repeating the complimentary remarks made. We have a sophisticated and marvelous team of financial experts. They manage and develop and create and bring things like this to us. So we're lucky. But here's my feedback would be just a tad more measured perhaps than some of my colleagues. I like both of these, but I would like you to think about, interact with your counterparts at state government, both legislatively and at the executive branch, and use some discretion and judgment around, which you always do, but around which or both of these to pursue. Because it may be that as things transpire, you only choose one of them. It may be that the debt, that the plan to take care of HEPR in a different way is the better plan. It may be that the Century Bond's the better plan, or it may be ultimately that both of them are. But I like them both, but I want your judgment layered on top of this and very thoughtfully delivered to us as to whether both are appropriate. That's my comment. And I don't know that that needs a response, but you folks you have your hands on the touchstone of what our counterparts at the other end of University Avenue have to deal with, and bring that back to us as you come back. But I will wholly endorse everyone else's commentary that speed appears to be of the essence here, and we need to move at your pace. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, questions by anyone? All right, hearing none, I want to thank Senior Vice President Franz, Associate Vice President Volno for an excellent presentation and for some just great work on how to leverage what we have at the university. Thank you very much. We will now move to our next item on the agenda, which is the President's recommended supplemental 2022 state budget request. This is before us for review and action. President Gable and Senior Vice President Franz will walk us through the proposed request. President Gable, if you would like to proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair McMillan, and members of the committee. In October, Governor Walz announced that he planned to submit a supplemental budget proposal to the legislature during the 2022 legislative session, which includes requests submitted by state agencies and the University of Minnesota. This is certainly a unique budget situation as a result of the state's remarkable $7.7 billion surplus for fiscal year 2022-23. So this moment also represents the potential for a transformational moment in how the state invests in itself, including how it invests in itself through education. Members of the committee, this is a moment when our whole state and our university as partners can be bold and take a leadership role to accelerate our work and the things we do on behalf of and to celebrate and amplify the state of Minnesota. And today's agenda item outlines our proposed request in alignment with that objective, which enhances the existing budget from which we have taken direction from the board and from MPAC 2025, our system-wide strategic plan. So as you'll hear about in more detail, our request includes funding to support HEPR, the Twin Cities Chemistry Undergraduate Teaching Lab, and the UMD Science Building Renewal. Those are projects with which you're all very familiar. But it also includes funding to reduce the cost of attendance burden for Minnesota resident undergrads by increasing support for the Promise program. It includes funding to enhance public safety and security and sustainability and environmental research. It includes a request to develop and deploy FARM, our Future of Animal Agricultural Research in Minnesota project, and to drive innovation through the Twin Cities Health Discovery Hub project and the Duluth Academic Health Science project. Madam Chair, we recommend the committee's approval of this supplemental budget request, but at this time, first, I'd like to turn it over to Senior Vice President Franz and the team to guide you through the detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you, Chair Mayron. First of all, as we walk through this, I want to thank President Gable, members of the board who have worked with us on this. And I want to thank the team. The Office of Senior Vice President worked extremely hard in a very short period of time to put this together, as well as the University of Minnesota Relations under Vice President Kramer. So thank you all for the exceptional work that you did to get us to this point. I also want to mention that there's always talent in this room. There's talent around this, the region table, and there's always talent out there. But today we have even more talent here to help answer any questions you might have about some of these programs. But let's talk about the next, go to the next slide and talk a little bit about why we're making this request. This is not our slide. This is the MMB slide, and this is what was announced about a week ago in terms of the $7.7 billion budget surplus for fiscal 22-23, and there are ongoing surpluses projected into 24 and 25. So this is not all, this money reflects the 22-23 budget, but it also shows the possibility of money continuing into fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. Clearly, this is unprecedented in terms of the amount of money that the state has on hand right now, and it provides a unique opportunity for the state in general and for the university in particular to provide its view of what do you do in this once in a generation opportunity that we're faced with these kinds of resources. So if we go to the next slide, as President Gable mentioned, we've got 5 areas that we want to focus on this request. We'll go through each one of these, but the areas here really, we believe, provide the best opportunity to demonstrate to the people of Minnesota and to the legislature and governor our decisions and how we can be a part of accelerating change and opportunity in Minnesota. So let's go to the next slide and walk through the overall request. So the components of the request add up to $935.6 million. On the left side, you'll see that the operational support, of what we call recurring investments, or we're asking to increase our O&M, or operational and maintenance adjustment, is $75 million per year. These include enhancing safety, security, and sustainability, and also increasing access to the university and reducing the cost of attendance burden for the University of Minnesota and for the residents of Minnesota. On the right side, we're talking about one-time investment. So they're really in 2 different buckets on this side. The first one is a reinvestment in existing and new facilities, and the other one is one-time safety, security, and sustainability investments. We'll walk through all these in due course, but I think it's important to realize that this $935 million request is less than 10% in terms of the amount that's recurring. Most of this is an ongoing, it is a one-time request, targeted support. So let's break this down into to the next slide. So the first one is our priority for existing board approval for our state capital request. We believe that the state capital request that this board approved earlier this year is a priority, and we should continue to seek support for that capital request, but we would increase it by $200 million for the HEAPR amount. So the original request had capital renewal of $200 million, and also had the chemistry teaching building on the UMTC campus and the science building renewal at UMD. So the requested investment now is $473.6 million instead of the $273.6 million it was before. Now, as we all know, the capital, as we talked about earlier, the capital requests have been hard for us to really chip away at the $5.1 billion need that we have in asset preservation and capital renewal. We believe that this particular request, but just like we talked about earlier on the innovative financing, this particular request is our version of what to ask for now first in this session coming forward. Let's talk about the next slide. On enhancing, oops. One of the things we wanted to do in enhancing safety, security, and sustainability is, and this is a $100 million request going across these three different areas. And the 3 different areas really divide not equally, but up in the personnel request for enhancing safety at the University of Minnesota campuses around all 5 campuses, increasing the building access control in a way that really is, would be across the enterprise and not something we haven't been able to do for a long time. This is why this particular request it's not a capital request, but it's a request that we need to make to the facilities to enhance our building access controls, our camera coverage, our lighting, our monitoring systems. And in addition, we also want to increase our security sensitive information systems that we have, our IT systems, to deal with the increasing threat that we have to ongoing security challenges, to ransomware and other concerns that we have that might have problems with our with our particular system. So the 10 million of this is recurring. That's primarily the personnel and some of the support, ongoing support for the infrastructure going forward. The last thing you want to do is enhance infrastructure systems and not have the personnel or the systems in place to make sure that they're ongoing and effective. So if we can go to the next slide. This slide really deals with our sustainability issues regarding campus level sustainability and utility master plans, on-site solar opportunities for us to increase in our campuses, our geothermal heating and cooling opportunities, which is one of the primary ways that we can really enhance the ability of our systems to be more efficient. The other issue that we want to talk about is that 75 million of this funding would be for energy and sustainability planning. As I mentioned, campus solar conversion of campus vehicles from gas to electric, significant investment in geothermal, hot water heating on our campuses. Geothermal is more efficient and addresses one of the largest components of the university's carbon footprint, and that is heating and cooling our buildings. The remaining 10 million of the funding in this category is for new facilities at the Natural Resources Research Institute. These facilities would provide funding for water and mine land remediation, lab expansion in Duluth, and a new mineral processing and metallurgy lab in Coleraine. Slide 8 is our increase in the access to the university and reducing the cost of attendance burden for Minnesota residents. This proposal would have a significant impact on reducing student debt through 3 approaches. The first approach is targeting increased scholarship awards to those Minnesotans with the greatest financial need through the enhancing the existing Promise program. And the most significant change here would be to expand income eligibility for the program from $120,000 income to $160,000 income, twice the median income level in Minnesota. The second part of this would be increasing the amount of the awards at all income levels, with a minimum award in the program increasing from about $300 today to $1,300 as a minimum. And finally, today the program supports about 13,000 to 14,000 students per year system-wide. With this funding, the program would expand to support an estimated 16,000 to 17,000 students, or an increase of 3,000 students per year, over 20% more students. So that is the first part of the expanding the Promise program. The second part is targeting awards to Minnesota undergraduates that enrolled at Crookston, Duluth, Morris, or Rochester. This new $30 million scholarship program would attract more students to those campuses with significant $3,000 to $4,000 awards in year 1, and retain those students with continuing large awards of $4,000 to $5,000 spread over their years 2 through 4. We estimate that this scholarship program would support 8,500 to 9,500 students when fully phased in, based on our current enrollment, with some allowance for growth to higher enrollment levels in the future. And finally, the last part of this, this particular $65 million investment is a proposal that includes $5 million to enhance existing services to students by proactively addressing issues that can slow down their degree progress, such as addressing mental health, tutoring needs, financial literacy, and support for academic advising. The next slide is for the support the future of animal agriculture research in Minnesota, or FARM program, has just come to be known. The university's Impact 2025 plan calls for developing and deploying new techniques and partnerships for smart farming and sustainable food supplies, as well as expanding, developing, and retaining agricultural and food system talent in rural communities and agribusiness. University proposes an initial investment by the state of Minnesota to be matched by $60 million of pledged philanthropy to launch the future of animal agriculture research in Minnesota. This project envisions a new university complex that would bring researchers, instructors, and industry participants to study all aspects of agriculture, livestock, the crops used to feed them, and the interactions that result on soil health, water quality, and climate. The last area here is advance the quality of healthcare and access. The university's Impact 2025 plan calls for driving innovation in next generation health by increasing collaborations in health education, clinical training, and new models of care. The proposed supplemental request includes two major investments in the future of healthcare and the university's ability to meet the challenging healthcare needs of Minnesota. The first is a request for full funding for the Health Discovery Hub on the Twin Cities campus. You may recall this facility was formerly called the Clinical Research Facility. This project has been in the board-approved 6-year capital plan. This proposal would move this project up a year in our plans from the 2023 session to the 2022 session, enabling the university to make progress here more quickly. This project will construct a new building to serve as the hub for university clinical research activities, an essential component of a world-class academic medical center. The proposed Health Discovery Hub is the second of 2 facilities recommended by the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission of 2015. The first facility was the Health Sciences Education Center, which was opened in 2020. Key components of the design focus are on the lessons we learned through COVID about how we do research. The work we can do with this new facility will extend our research statewide, leverage the multidisciplinary strengths of our university, focus on keeping people in their homes, and build partnerships with Minnesota's biomedical industry to innovate on new medical device technologies. And finally, the second request is the design funding for a new facility for the College of Pharmacy and Medical School campuses in Duluth to be co-located in the Duluth Medical District in downtown Duluth. In 2019, the state legislature designated $90 million in bonding toward improvements in the Duluth Regional Exchange District, referred to now as the Duluth Medical District. This was for the benefit of the community, Essentia Health System, and St. Luke's Healthcare System. This was a partnership with the city of Duluth, which invested $10 million in public improvements. This investment by the University of Minnesota is consistent with the improvements for this area and would further the regional impact of the Duluth Medical District. The proposed university facility will include teaching spaces and clinical research spaces that will be designed and built based on the needs of the university community and be fully integrated with the amenities and features of the broader Duluth Medical District. The Duluth Medical District is an opportunity for a partnership between the city of Duluth, Essentia Health System, St. Luke's Healthcare System, and the University of Minnesota. The partnership would result in a new academic healthcare center in Duluth where students would experience interprofessional educational collaboration from 2 healthcare centers. With this vision for world-class healthcare in greater Minnesota, patients would have access to groundbreaking clinical trials, subspecialists in an academic practice, and one of the most recognized and respected teams in Minnesota. Finally, this collaboration would improve access to quality healthcare in northern Minnesota and rural communities, and allow the university to better partner with the communities and tribal nations to provide access to healthcare for historically underserved patients in greater Minnesota, which aligns with the mission of the Duluth campus of the medical school. And finally, the summary. This new supplemental request proposed spending in 5 thematic areas totals $662 million in new spending. 75 million of this is recurring, 587 million is non-recurring. The supplemental request, combined with our initial 2022 state capital request of $273 million approved by the board in October, brings the total proposed request to $935.6 million. And with that, Madam Chair, we're happy to take questions, and we have plenty of people here to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz, for a very comprehensive explanation of the resolution that is before us. Before I ask for any questions or comments, I would like to get a motion to recommend approval of the resolution related to the supplemental 2022 state budget request to the state of Minnesota.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Then let's turn to discussion at this time. Any questions or comments by anyone in the room or on Zoom?
Chair Mayron, Regent Farnsworth.
All right, Regent Farnsworth, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. A few comments and one question. Really appreciate the work on this, especially as Senior Vice President Franz talked about. Many of us are aware of the quick work and timeline on this in particular, so I wanted to thank everyone who was involved for that. Just skipping around here, and I'll try to reference the slides because I don't think the paper copy has any page numbers, but I think we can follow along. Really appreciate the system integration in terms of the part of the request around the Duluth College of Pharmacy and Medical School, last slide that was just talked about. Going to increasing access to the university and reducing costs of attendance burden for Minnesota residents. I think this is fantastic. This is exactly the type of stuff we should be talking about. And it's incumbent on this board to continue, continue conversations and strategy that move this work even further outside of supplemental budget requests to the state legislature, thinking particularly around our conversations around tuition. Well, I'll make one more comment and then I'll ask the question. Then going to the beginning of the presentation around public safety, I would be remiss not to point out, this is the part that I think makes me most excited just because of the real immediate needs that this part of the request gets at. Public safety is one of the top two things people talk to me about all the time. And I think this is very responsive to what we've been hearing as an institution around our challenges. Not that we haven't been being responsive in general, but I want to highlight that the fact that it was included in this particular piece, I think is significant and something, if this plan is moved forward today, that I hope that we're able to advertise and talk about, contextually that this is part of a request, so stakeholders understand that. It is important. The question I have goes back to the slide or the point 3 about the cost attendance burden. About enhancing, I think Senior Vice President Franz, and please correct me if I get the number wrong, the $5 million to enhance student services that aid on-time graduation. Did you say that, is that going to include some personnel costs in there? Or, I know someone had talked to me yesterday about this request in general, that they had heard that beyond the personnel part of public safety, that there was going to be some additional investments in personnel in here. So maybe question about personnel specifically to that bullet point, but then just in general, if there's any other personnel investments in here that maybe just weren't directly named, but obviously this is a multifaceted plan. So that's my comments and question. Thank you, Chair Mayron.
Thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Regent Farnsworth. What was your question about the public safety component of the ongoing or the student services? I wasn't sure if
I'm sorry, I skipped around a little bit, but my question was about two-prong approach about personnel. One, in the $5 million for enhancing student services that aid on-time graduation. Is there a request that relates to personnel costs in that bullet point in particular? And then besides public safety, where personnel was clearly pointed out, is there any other part of this request that deals with supporting personnel or staff costs in the request in its entirety?
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. I'll let Vice President Tonneson start on the response there. Thank you.
Sure. Chair Mayron, Regent Farnsworth, yes, those are the two places where there would be personnel additions. That's what makes it essentially recurring in terms of a request. both in the student services area, in all of the examples that Senior Vice President Franz mentioned, there are personnel costs to provide those services. In addition to that, in the safety and security piece, both in the public safety portion as well as the technology security portion, there are personnel requirements to maintain the infrastructure and the additions that we are proposing. So yeah, those are the two areas, and that is all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Mayron.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Vice Chair Sviggum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of comments before I begin here, Madam Chair, if I could. First of all, this supplemental request is bold. And I think it's bold from the standpoint of the number. We've never been in a position to be able to ask a number like this, but state has never been in the position to having a $770 million surplus on top of the budget reserve, on top of other monies as well. So I think we reasonably asked for this because we have been asked, as I understand from the administration anyway, over at the Capitol, for a significant bold request. Most importantly, this request is needed. These projects and what is listed in this coalition of projects is needed besides being bold. Those are very, very important, both aspects. I sit here though, and I feel a little bit like my grandchildren when grandma asked them for their Christmas list. And it's a whole page of 20 different things. I feel like my grandchild asking my wife for what's on the Christmas list. It gets rather extensive at times. If I could and look at the entire projects, I think the balance is very appropriate. When you look at the coalition that you can build around the state, whether it be within the legislature or just within the citizens of Minnesota, from the agricultural community to the Duluth Clinic, to tuition, to the medical parts of this request, the HEPA parts, I think it builds a great coalition that can really, really come together. In any large package, there's always going to be a few things that you might disagree with. You don't get everything the way you want it in life. It's not going to happen. So I'm just going to mention just one thing, maybe a touch different than what Regent Farnsworth did. I think we need to address tuition. I'm glad tuition is part of this as a request. If it were my druthers, I'd make sure that that tuition request applied to all students at the university. And not just maybe to some that would qualify for the Promise Scholarship or other outstate campuses. It seems to me that we get to the point where that redistribution of income, redistribution of tuition to some students at the expense of others, we go too far sometimes. I think if my numbers are correct, our tuition statewide within our university system is about 7% higher than it needs to be for all students, because we take that tuition money and the O&M money from the state and redirect it to others. Now that's great. You know, it's a wonderful thing to do, but at some time or another, we should be looking at all students that attend the University of Minnesota, and that they should receive, all students receiving their share of what the request is. But in totality, it's a great package. It's needed. It's bold. And maybe with the request of the legislature and the governor, this is a one-time opportunity for investment that we as a university and the legislature and the governor should not miss. It's one-time opportunity. I hope, Myron, we're going to be able to capitalize on it. And no question, I guess, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regent Sviggum. Chair Powell, you're next up.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Mayron. I want to start with a question. Senior Vice President Franz, as you went through this, and the question now is on the point 3, increasing access. I thought that as part of the expanding the Promise program, we were also going to raise the limit of eligibility of that program to 75,000. I don't know if I heard you say that, but I want to make sure that that's part of it.
Madam Chair, Regent Powell, I want to make sure we get the number right. Vice President Tonneson.
Sure. Chair Mayron, Regent Powell, today, the Promise program serves students from families with incomes up to 120,000. This would expand it to students from families up to 160,000. So twice the median income. Is that your question?
That's part of it. The other part of it is though, I know that ours is tied also to 50,000. The current program, do I have that right? That if your family income is less than 50, that's the other break that I'm looking at. I believe that this would lift that to 75.
Chair Mayron, Regent Powell, that is not currently part of our planned adjustment for the program.
Okay, so really the focus of the program is to go to lift the income level at which you receive support.
Madam Chair and Regent Powell, both to lift the income and the amount of the board. So it's really we want to increase the number of students that are available through this income increase, and we want to increase the amount that's available to them.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that clarification. And I want to, with appreciation to Regent Swigham's comment on this program, which I do appreciate. And honestly, I think reasonable people can clearly, agree or disagree on exactly how to do this. What I like about this is this approach. It really does, reaching 17,000 students. It's going to reach over, half of our undergraduate families. It's a lot of people. And I think that, in a very important way, I think it's an enrollment builder for us. And it is both, its access is important, very important. It will do that, but we're going to have more, I think we'll have more students if we do this. And that also is very important to me. So on balance, I like the way that that you address the access issue with this. Other than that, I'll echo all of Regent Swigham's comments. I think this is a really good, program. And the reason it is because there's nothing here that's sort of pie in the sky. What this does is it advances already developed strategic initiatives and pulls them forward, whether it's the farm initiative, the safety initiatives, these health sciences, they're already in the pipeline. And we know that they're important. And so this will enable us to move those forward. So compliments to the team for the way this has come together.
Thank you very much, Chair Powell. Next, we'd like to hear from Student Representative Buttar.
Chair Mayron, President Gable, and Senior Vice President Franz. I had a couple of comments and a question. So firstly, as student representative, I would like to thank you and your team for prioritizing increasing accessibility for all students. I believe expansion of the eligibility criteria for the Promise program among creation of other scholarships is a great way to remove barriers to higher education in an equitable way and truly show support for the student body. Further, as a professional student in the medical school, investments to enhance research discovery and increasing access, particularly geographical access, is essential to positively impacting health outcomes in Minnesota. So my question regards point 2, enhancing safety, security, and sustainability, specifically with increasing personnel. Would you have information you could share with us today on who would comprise these additional public safety personnel? Would they be additional police officers, or could this allow for a hiring of a second full-time social worker and or more safety guides? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take that question on?
Madam Chair, I'll take a shot at that. Thank you. Well, thank you, Student Regent Buttar. I think one of the questions that we've talked about and our concern was to make sure that when we thought about investing going forward, it was a comprehensive investment. As you are aware, this last year, we've invested in community engagement and safety guides and a social worker and a community outreach person. We want to enhance we want to enhance all of those programs. So what our goal really going forward, and frankly, we're still in the planning process of this, so appreciate your comments. And right now it's very helpful. We want to make sure that we look to the future to engage not only the police officers, which we believe we need more of, but we also want to engage in those wider services that we really need to provide on a regular basis going forward. So it's really I think, a community involvement type of model that we want to come up with, and we're still kind of working on some of the details, but it would definitely involve a wider range of people in the UMPD than we've had in the past. To answer your question specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Student Representative Buttar?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, Regent Rosha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And following the very apt comments that have already been made, just talk about a couple things. You know, when we're talking about making a request of this size, this is unique in my experience for something quite this dramatic. And I support making large requests like this, and I especially like the approach that the administration is taking on this, where it comes up somewhat as a menu that allows our state leaders at the legislature to identify priorities within their view as public servants. I would, my sense is I would like to see focus on the accessibility, the funds under number, addressing that. I think that the proposal for addressing the tuition or cost of attendance at our system campuses, I think is so just so strongly needed. And one question that I would have, I've got a couple questions. I'll break for responses, but my question on that is, will that be reflected in the sticker price? Will that actually, is that going to be determined as an aid, or is that going to actually affect the actual sticker price? Because I still think sticker prices are and attracting people who aren't even applying to see that they have the aid available in order to get our numbers stronger on the system campuses that have that need. But otherwise, I think that either way, whether it's in aid or whether it's in actual reduced overall tuition pricing, I think that's a very strong proposal, and I hope the legislature takes that into consideration and is supportive of that. I would echo the comments that were made by Regent Sviggum regarding the Promise Scholarship. My challenge with this, of course, is that we still have imperfect information. I think that, to me, it's the prospect that all students come in with an opportunity to access university education is so important, and we have students that are tethered to family resources that they don't have access to. I would be less concerned if I knew there was a process whereby students could validate that they don't have access to those resources, whether it's because their family has exceptional need that prevents them from being supported by their family income, or simply that there's an estrangement where they don't have that access. Because it just, to me, it's heartbreaking to think that there are worthy students that would benefit from the opportunity that can't, because they can't afford it for that reason. But the opportunity to apply those funds toward reducing the overall cost of our tuition as we've talked about before, is about 50% higher than our surrounding states. And that, to me, is one of the most significant needs that we have. And I hope the legislature looks at finding a way of providing resources. Last two comments: public safety, I think, is really essential at this point. I'm very happy to see that on there. I hope the legislature looks at that favorably. And I also think then finally that the farm at the ARM program really is based, talking about our research conversation earlier today. That investment, I think, will really be important to bring us back into optimal position to support our rural communities, our ag communities, and I hope the legislature takes that into consideration as well. Subject to response on the issue of the sticker price on state campuses. Those are my comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rosha. Senior Vice President Franz, do you want to address the question on the impact for our campuses outside of the Twin Cities in terms of, is it going to impact the sticker price, or it looks like from the materials that we're talking about enhancing or a scholarship for those students?
Madam Chair, Regent DeRocha, thank you. The plan is to not, the tuition decision, what the tuition will be as a separate decision. But this program is designed to provide those scholarship opportunities both across the system and specifically for those campuses. So they're designed specifically to provide relief to students that qualify. And the decision about what the published tuition rate will be is a separate decision.
All right.
Madam Chair?
Yes, do you have a follow-up, Regent Rosha?
Yes, thank you. The comment I'll make on that is again, while I think that's good, I have too much anecdotal evidence to the point where it's a trend that people in some of the areas where they would attend those campuses aren't even applying because campuses across state lines have a lower starting point. And even though the effective rate of the scholarship would make our system campuses competitive or more affordable, they're not even trying because they don't realize that these funds and that and the promise scholarship, it can be a bit of a drug that it makes us not think that the tuition rate is a challenge for some people. That's why I'd really like to see us get those rates down across the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. The next speaker is Regent McMillan. Oh, and
I'm fine,
thinking
thank you.
Regent McMillan, you may be passing and that I'm going on to Regent Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Regent Mayeron. Just wanted to make a couple comments here. I agree with Regent Swigum. This is a bold and a balanced proposal. I really like that there are many important things here. I would like to say a word about the students here. We, as a number of us who are new residents, have talked a great deal about what we've mentioned here, which is that if you're on the west side of the state, we lose a lot of people to North Dakota and South Dakota. If you're more in the region where I live, it's Iowa and Wisconsin. So the kind of outflow of many Minnesota residents to get their education outside the state, I think, is a real loss to our state. And so I really think two of the primary ways that's going to be changed would be to provide everything we can in terms of increasing access, whether, and making it more affordable or more possible for students who really want to look at it. And then particularly with regard to the Twin Cities campus, the safety and security issues as we continue to hear from parents and families and all who are concerned about crime and what's going on in the Twin Cities, that the things we can do to change that, I think, are going to be really important. And again, I'll just say I really like the balance. I think it's important to focus on the agricultural aspects of Minnesota. Of course, I also strongly support the healthcare and access approaches, both here in the Twin Cities, having appropriate facilities to do that. And I think a wonderful opportunity in Duluth with the Duluth Medical District. I think that's great if we get our college pharmacy and medical school there involved with Essentia. That just makes a great deal of sense, and I think will really enhance the UMD program. So I just strongly support this proposal.
All right, thank you very much, Regent Johnson. And I just want to comment that I agree with so many of the reasons that those who have spoken before me gave in terms of supporting this because of its boldness, because of its breadth and balance. I also want to say what impresses me so much about this particular proposal is that it is designed to benefit others, meaning students. Is designed to benefit the state of Minnesota and its residents. So in terms of what I would hope the legislature would see is that every one of these dollars that we are asking for creates the opportunity for a huge return on investment, short-term and long-term, that will benefit, as I said, students and residents. So I think it's a huge win for the state of Minnesota in the event that the legislature, in its wisdom, adopts this proposal, and I very much hope that they do. So with that, I understand there are no other comments or questions. Is that correct, Mr. Langworthy? No one else?
That is correct, Chair Mayeron.
All right, then there being no further discussion, it appears we are ready to vote. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much, presenters. At this time, we're going to take a 15-minute recess. It is currently 2:55, so we will resume at 3:10 p.m. with the next item on our agenda, which is the Enterprise Risk Management Plan.
Chair Mayron, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
All right. Calling the meeting back to order of the Finance and Operations Committee. At this time, we are going to turn our attention to the second Impact 2025 update, and that is the item focusing on enterprise risk management. Senior Vice President Franz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank the chancellors from our other 4 campuses for their help and insight in supporting this effort and this endeavor to help get us to the right proposal for the board to consider. The last nearly 2 years have been marked by disruption and uncertainty. As the university has navigated these challenges, it is more apparent than ever that we need to have strategies in place to both plan for and withstand the unknown. A critical element to building our resilience includes having a strong enterprise risk management strategy. Materials in your docket today describe our plan to enhance enterprise risk management at the University of Minnesota through innovation, technology, and process improvement. Development of this plan builds off previous risk management efforts and leverages a great deal of work completed by the Audit and Compliance Committee, as well as other risk assessment and mitigation planning efforts over the last several years. I want to thank our task group members who worked on this over the last year to help assess our current risk management framework, benchmark against other higher education institutions and local companies that have highly regarded enterprise risk management programs and processes. And they helped make recommendations for a comprehensive enterprise risk management program. In their research and analysis, the task group recommended 5 deliverables to be completed by the end of next year. The group, the composition of the group is listed in the plan, and in particular, I want to shout out to Gail Platt, our former chief auditor, whose great experience and advice helped me over this last year understand the role of enterprise risk management as it supports and relates to the audit function of the university, and to help assess where we are relative to other best practices. The list of deliverables for this next year that are in the plan in front of you are a list of enterprise risk, is that we will develop a list of enterprise risk prioritized using a comparative assessment and tolerance rubric. We hope to have this by the spring of 2022. We want to have a list of risk mitigation efforts for each enterprise risk. We want to develop a process to identify, assess, and escalate blind spots and risk vulnerabilities. And we want to have an enterprise communication plan to increase awareness of risks and mitigation strategies. We want to develop metrics to guide operational risk owners to substantiate risk, monitor actions, and report progress. Now, the key to success in achieving these deliverables as engagement is the engagement at the top. This starts with the president and the president's senior leadership team being engaged in the initial risk identification and prioritization. Then senior leaders will assign what we are calling risk owners to further assess each risk and develop risk mitigation strategies. The plan calls for an outside consultant to help drive the risk identification process, as well as a dedicated enterprise risk management staff to lead the program once it becomes operational. An important element of the program includes leveraging similar work that's already been carried out by other units, such as compliance and controls that are already in place, and by also relying on regular reporting and communication that already exists. Madam Chair, we present to you the Enterprise Risk Management Plan for your consideration and review as we work on developing this for the 2022 year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me open it up then for any discussion or questions by fellow regents, those on the phone, in Zoom and on the floor, and our student representatives as well.
Chair Mayron, Regent Powell.
All right, Regent Powell.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Mayron. Just a quick comment and then a quick question. First of all, I really appreciate the way you're approaching this. Your comment on leadership and engagement at the top and risk owners and, setting up a process so that we can really think deeply about what our risks are and how to mitigate. I applaud you. It can be, sort of seen as a nerdy topic, but if you get this right, you can dodge bullets and, save a lot of money. So thank you. But my question is, it wasn't clear to me the role of the chief auditor in the whole process. I mean, in recognizing again that this should be owned by the president and her team, but I want to just make sure I'm clear on the role of the audit team.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Regent Powell, I think one of the key understandings as I've worked on this process and analysis is to make sure that the auditor performs the independent assessment of program consistency and program integrity. And so we always are going to need the independence of an internal audit program to make their assessment on various programs that are critical that we maintain compliance and in that regard. But I think one of the things, this is not designed to take the place of an audit. It's designed to reduce the audit exposure and hopefully provide more availability of materials for the audit team to review and assess and avoid. I mean, we obviously hope to enhance compliance and reduce those situations where we're not in compliance. And those obviously lead to audit findings. And so if we do our job right over the years, we would hope that we would reduce those exposures. But this is really the operational side of avoiding the audit findings and problems that are going to be analyzed by the audit team as an independent auditor coming in to make sure whatever we tell the president or the board has been verified and audited, and there's no question that we're doing our own audit, so to speak. So it's really operationally focused so that the senior leadership team for the university are analyzing what risk exists, what can they do to mitigate that risk, but it doesn't take away from the internal audit department to audit those programs and make sure that they meet current requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up on that?
Well, I guess what I'm hearing is that the leadership of the administration through the process need to define kind of the risk map, if you will, and need to do a detailed risk assessment. And then that in turn guides the audit team who are basing how they deploy their resources on, risks that have been identified.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? I have one quick question, and that is when I looked at the implementation guideline or timeline that's set out in our materials, I believe it's at page 194 of our docket materials, it said develop the RFP to hire the consultant. So is the consultant, where are you with the RFP? That was supposedly January 2021, which is nearly a year ago. So where are we on that process of retaining a consultant?
Madam Chair, very good reading. That happens to be a typo. It should be January 2022. But yeah, so we are engaged in that process, but we hope to get that process and get the RFP out to hire a consultant in just a few weeks.
Okay, fair enough. All right, any other questions or comments? Mr. Langworthy, anybody there?
No questions or comments, Chair Mayron.
All right, then we will go ahead and move on to the next item, which is budget variables and levers. This is our final discussion item for today, and it has to do with the fiscal year 2023 budget variables and levers. Vice President Tonneson will lead today's discussion. Vice President Tonneson, if you would like to proceed.
Thank you very much, Chair Mayron. Good afternoon again, everyone. This presentation is a step really along the way to developing the FY23 budget. It's one of the pieces where we meet with you to share information that hopefully will help you as you think about next year's budget. And really on the positive side for this late in the day, there are no decisions required on this item. As Chair Mayron mentioned, this is a discussion item, hopefully to generate thoughts and ideas and questions. So to set the context for the agenda item, we thought it might be helpful to see where we sit today in terms of the planned discussions on the budget throughout the year. This month, our focus is on an overview of the primary revenue and expenditure variables that drive the budget each year. Background information on the trends and current status of those variables is included as an attachment to your docket item summary. So I will not spend time today presenting that information. Instead, this roughly 15 minutes or so presentation will highlight some details surrounding just one of those components that doesn't get as much attention in the normal course of budget discussions. And that is our reliance on other revenues, which I will explain here in a moment. At the February board meeting, we will bring for discussion estimated values of the different revenue and expense variables that we will need to decide on or address specifically in the FY23 budget. Again, these are detailed in your docket materials on pages 208 to 215. And finally, the president will deliver her recommended fully balanced FY23 operating budget for your review in May and action in June. As you are aware, many of our budget management decisions are made within the parameters of fund accounting, which means that we must pay attention to the source of the funds as we plan for their use. And in that structure, it is most often helpful to distinguish between what we call the primary discretionary funds in the budget framework, namely the unrestricted O&M appropriation and tuition versus all other revenues. Tuition and the O&M appropriation are planned at the high institutional level. Many of the enrollment strategies that seek to arrive at a certain number of students, as well as the recommended tuition rates impacting the majority of students in our undergraduate and graduate programs, are developed centrally. Additionally, it is university leadership that develops the recommended requests to the state of Minnesota for additional O&M appropriations. In these ways, it is at the institutional level, not at the unit level, that we are shaping those variables for the purposes of best addressing budgetary needs and initiatives. Growth in these particular funds is necessary to support literally all aspects of our mission, direct programming as well as the associated overhead. All other revenues, which are the focus of my brief comments today, are then everything else. These are revenues generated by our departments based on the activities they are engaged in. Most are not common across all units, but are specific to the campus, school, or even department within. As you have seen on previous occasions, we've been tracking the relative portion each of these major groupings of revenues represents as a % of our total revenues. Over time, we all understand that the state portion of our revenues has decreased. At the same time, tuition has grown as a % of the overall revenues, partially to offset some of the drop in state support when the appropriations were reduced, and partially to pick up a larger portion of our annual cost increases. But I think equally important to understand is that we've been becoming more reliant on the other sources of revenue in the picture. As our activities have become more diverse, as our quality has improved over time, and as we have worked to build a general understanding in the units about the benefits of generating income to support their activities, that portion of the overall budget has grown from 49% to 59% over this time frame. And that is difficult work to do, to find the relevant and appropriate activities that could result in more revenue, and then to produce or act in a way that generates that income. I'm actually personally pleased and impressed that we have moved that bar so significantly. So what are we talking about specifically in that space? The primary sources are listed here and are somewhat self-explanatory, but I will quickly summarize each just to ensure we have a common understanding of what they are. Sponsored grants are financial awards, often multi-year, to faculty and teams that have successfully submitted a proposal to a granting agency, whether that be the federal government, state government, a foundation, and so forth. Indirect cost recovery is really, for many of our sponsored grants, the sponsoring entity agrees to provide an additional certain % of the grant over and above the direct project award to act as partial reimbursement of our indirect or overhead costs associated with doing the work of the grant. Auxiliary income is the next category. That's a form of sales income generated through approved rates or prices for sales to the public. That is for student housing, dining, parking, bookstores, and so forth. Sales, fees, and miscellaneous income. These are unrestricted revenues at the unit level generated from a variety of activities. Examples would be sales of educational or research services to external parties, fees to students, royalty income related to inventions, charges for events or entry into venues, ticket sales for lectures or concerts, and this is also where our earnings on our invested cash, the revenue into central reserves, would be counted. The next category, in addition to sponsored grants, we also have some non-sponsored grants and contracts. Gets kind of confusing, but these are still restricted to a particular purpose, but often there is less line item budget management or approval by the outside entity and less required reporting or processing protocols. Gifts and endowment income includes philanthropy resulting in annual direct spending of the gift itself, or if it is set up as an endowment, it includes the annual payout from the earnings of the endowment. Private practice, our physicians, dentists, and nurses generate revenues throughout their practice of clinical services, and the revenues from those activities make their way into the university to support costs for compensation, space, operations, and some programming. And finally, restricted appropriations come to the university in two forms. The federal government does appropriate funds directly to the university outside of sponsored grants. These are often referred to as McIntyre-Stennis, Hatch, or Smith-Lever funds due to the pieces of legislation that originated them. And they go primarily to Minnesota Extension and the Agricultural Experiment Station. And the state does appropriate close to $100 million annually to designated purposes or units within the university. These are the restricted state specials for things like Minnesota Extension, the Vet Diagnostic Lab, NRRI, the Talented Youth Mathematics Program, and so forth. For the relative magnitude of these revenues, we can look to this chart. For FY22, the total approved budget included projected revenues in these categories of $2.2 billion. So just over half of our total revenues for the year. One thing to note here, the non-sponsored grants and contract bar is larger than normal for FY22 due to the inclusion of the estimated federal relief awards, both for students and for the institution. Estimating how those funds would flow across fiscal years resulted in a higher number, 415 million, which is about 85 million higher than in a normal year. Moving from that high level institutional view of the totals, this chart shows the diversity of revenues at the academic unit level. Even though auxiliary revenues are excluded from this chart for all campuses, I've also stayed with FY20 total revenues at this point to avoid any significant COVID impacts from distorting the data. This chart really has several messages, but for today, it helps to make clear that reliance on other revenues varies by unit. The lime green and royal blue represent the framework revenues of state appropriation and tuition. If you exclude those for units like the College of Liberal Arts on the Twin Cities campus, the Carlson School, or the Morris campus, there is very little left in their revenue portfolio. If you look at units like the medical school, the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences, the School of Public Health, or the College of Veterinary Medicine, for example, their activities are generating sales or clinical income, sponsored grants, ICR, and non-sponsored contracts in larger proportions than for other units. There is risk with reliance on other revenues and more to manage, but there is also more opportunity. And it is important to understand that the options for some units to grow these resources are greater than for other units. That is in part why we approach each unit separately in making decisions to arrive at a strong and balanced budget every year. Within the budget process, these quote other revenues are managed more at that local unit level where the action takes place. It's expected that they will do the work to grow these revenues as possible to cover all cost increases, and even where possible to relieve some of the pressure on the O&M tuition side of the budget by picking up more of the total overall cost, if that's possible. If they cannot grow the revenue for some reason, then they are expected to lower costs in those activities and balance their budget that way. Once in a while, it is necessary to subsidize these activities by allocating O&M dollars to cover costs, particularly when the revenues in question are insufficient for a period of time. An example here would be when the sponsored activity falls in a college. Perhaps a highly productive faculty member leaves the university. The grant revenue and the associated indirect cost revenue drops automatically. As they work to increase the productivity of remaining faculty or hire a new superstar to pull in more grants, O&M funds will be necessary to cover costs in that transition. These types of conversations take place in the budget process when we meet with each unit to understand where the opportunities are and where the challenges are in applying these revenues to costs. A conversation heightened this year in the budget process is around how the strategic plan MPACT 2025 calls out goals to increase these other revenues. Throughout the university, there will be actions driven by the strategic plan that could positively impact our ability to generate increases in these other revenues. Things like improving partnerships with local communities and organizations do not specifically reference revenue growth, but in improving relationships, we increase opportunities for goodwill, for donations, and potentially business ventures. But in addition to the less direct connections like those, there are some measures, as identified here, that provide clear direction on taking action to achieve revenue growth. Please understand that we have incorporated the plan into our internal processes in a variety of ways. And one of those ways began this fall when we asked units to explain in developing their FY23 budget submission how things they are doing this year and have planned for next year will directly address the metrics of the strategic plan. We're gathering information on the types of investments they are making or would like to make in the next couple of years under each of the action plans and metrics that are relevant to them. By consistently making that connection between work being done and the plan, we hope to drive decisions that will positively impact the measures, including those you see here. We also have some natural incentives in our budget model, which we discussed last month, so I won't repeat again here today, that drive units to seek out new revenues and leverage existing sources as much as possible to meet their needs. Now, growing these revenues is important and really very helpful in covering costs. However, I also want to point out some of the difficulties in putting too much confidence in these sources as the primary solution to our future budget challenges. Although they represent more than 50% of our annual revenues when combined, I've listed here some of the more tricky aspects of managing these and balancing a budget. First, the vast majority are restricted at some level, shown here in red. Some to a particular purpose, and others are restricted to a particular unit within the institution, such as a center, a college, or even a particular program. We cannot move these red dollars around the institution to address problems, and often the growth here does not allow us to free up O&M or tuition in that same unit in that same amount. Sometimes that's possible, as I've mentioned, and that's a benefit, but it can be difficult to align those. Second, many of the sources provide funding on a one-time or non-recurring basis. This is especially true with grants and contracts and gifts, which means those sources are often not available to support personnel and programming costs beyond the terms of the particular item. Third, as I've showed you, these sources do not have equal impact across units, which creates issues of unequal opportunity and unequal ability to manage financially. And finally, the costs of research are significant. And while we collectively want to grow our research base, and thus the sponsored revenue you see here in the top bar, that comes with additional costs over and above the revenue received. It is impossible to increase the breadth and depth of research activity without increasing the infrastructure and support costs that are only partially reimbursed with the grant-related indirect cost recovery funds. None of these are raised as reasons to back off our goals. Please don't think that's what I'm saying. They are just here to point out what might not be obvious. It takes more strategy and strategizing to incorporate them in, and they cannot take the place of regular growth in our O&M, state appropriation, and intuition. As today's presentation focused on a little bit more on that deeper dive into the other revenues portion of the budget, I want to mention again that the docket materials do include information related to the overall budget framework. We provided information related to past expenditures and what is driving our costs, and to the major framework resources of state appropriations, tuition, and planned internal reallocations. And I'm happy to address any of those pieces in a conversation today. But let me close my comments with a setup for the anticipated conversation on the budget that we will have at the February meeting. As you think about the information on resources and costs, the prompts you see here directly relate to decisions we will need to make in building the President's recommended budget for FY23. So either today or over the next several months, your thoughts and statements of priority would be very helpful. And with that, Madam Chair, Senior Vice President Franz and I would be happy to participate in a discussion on the budget if you would like to do that today.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and particularly on the focus of other revenues. I think this was terrific. Let me ask if there are any comments or thoughts to provide to our administration on this topic.
Chair Mayron, Regent Swigum.
All right, Regent Swigum.
Madam Chair, thank you. Julie, as I look at the levers going into 4-year 2023, I believe is what we're talking about, 4-year 23. I just want to make a comment that we need to and will have to, as a university, look at investing in our people a little bit more in the next year. The market demands that. We're losing folks to other positions. Inflation is touching, what I hear, 7% today, one of the presenters said. And we've done a lot to control costs in the past years with the pandemic, the furloughs and the pay cuts and the hiring freeze. I tell people we're the only institution in the state that did as much as the university did, the only one. But as we look to 2023, with the pressures, with the inflation that exists there, with the market that exists, that lever of investment in our folks that work here. Although I think the president told me yesterday that our headcount is actually down a little bit. I think you told me, didn't you, Madam President? And that's been a goal of mine for some time. But some investment, more than we've done in our people, is going to be important in the lever. Just a comment. You don't need to respond.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Vice Chair Swigum. Next person up is Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you, Vice President Tonneson. Again, carving out this piece of the budget equation and diving in a little is really helpful. I guess I'd be interested, I'm looking at the Twin City, or the slide 222 that you held up for there, you dove in on. And to me, what we ought to take from that, and maybe your overall discussion, is that not all these academic units are obviously created equal. That's what that tells me. And my biggest alarms would be going off for units that are highly tuition dependent and yet do not have much, if any, way to go after these supplemental revenues. And, you know, I see a few of them on there, and their ability to go get money from other places, whether it's the red bar, the blue bar, the light blue bar being gifts, or, you know, endowment income, fees, sales. There's some of our units that are very good at that. College of Science and Engineering, medical. There's some that just don't have that in their toolbox. And I don't think it's because they're doing anything wrong. It's just not the way they're set up. So I don't know if you have any more comment on it, but that's where I start to feel like, boy, we've got to look at that tuition dependency, because we don't have other levels to turn to, and we got to look at state support. And I think that's what you're saying, but maybe play that back if I didn't hear it right.
Vice President Tonneson.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. Regent McMillan, yes, you are exactly right. Welcome to my world. That is part of the annual challenge we have, and the conversations we have are how best can we use the resources collectively to address the needs and make each unit as successful as we can. And some of those units, that's exactly the point, really by virtue of their niche within the university and their business that they're in, don't have as many opportunities, at least in large proportion to their budget, to make up for, as you point out, a drop in tuition. So that's where the state appropriation becomes extremely important, and why these unrestricted discretionary funds are really important for us to be able to make those decisions to help units as we need to across the system.
Thank you.
Any follow-up, Regent McMillan?
Nope.
All
Thank you,
right.
Chair Mayor.
Thank you. Regent Rosha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking across the range of things, and I following Jim McMillan's comments about those areas that have to rely on tuition. The thing that stands out to me across all of these different levers and means of generating revenue that's out of whack is tuition. As I mentioned in the previous agenda item, when the states that are around us are in the $9,000 and $10,000 tuition and fee range, and we're at over $15,000 for resident students, land grant flagship institution, we're just way out of line. It's 50% higher, and if we were, for instance, if a third low in our compensation for key employee groups, we'd work out of the general budget, running around with our hair on fire, we would know we have a serious problem. And so it's disappointing to me that we don't put more emphasis on the fact that we're really fine in trying to provide this access to a world-class public education at a more affordable level, as we see at all the states that surround us. The other distinction that we have compared to the states that are around us is the fact that we have a net loss of students. All the states around us are net gainers in students. We lose about 2,000 students per year, leaving the state more than are coming in. And so when we look at enrollment strategy, and this may be one of the ways that we try to address the tuition challenge. One of the things about Madison, which certainly on a quality level is on par with the University of Minnesota, they have a higher percentage of non-residents, but they admit a larger percentage of resident students. And so it's a bit of a paradox there, but to the extent that allows them to keep it affordable for the resident students and admitting a larger percentage of resident students, that seems to be a functional strategy for them. And the University of Minnesota used to have a much larger student body than it does now, when it had the open admission to all Minnesota residents, just not necessarily to degree granting programs. I believe that we would be able to support that. I understand there's some sensitivity with Minnesota State and some other considerations, but if we have people wanting to attend a large comprehensive research university and they're not being admitted here, but they're still quality students who go on to do great things, but then they're choosing to leave the state because they didn't have access here, I think that those are students that we should consider providing an opportunity to attend. I'm not as worried about some of the metrics, the flashy metrics that people kind of point to for rankings and things. I'm more concerned about making sure we're doing a great job of educating Minnesota students. So a reasonable enrollment growth, I think, would help alleviate some pressure on our tuition, but focusing and reducing tuition and getting it on par with other public institutions, especially when you consider that our initial charter contemplated at one time no tuition for resident students when we were able to do that, and we haven't really been close to that for quite some time. So those are my thoughts and my preference as we look forward to making these decisions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Regent Rosha. Any response, Vice President Tonneson?
No, Chair Mayron, other than thank you. Those kinds of thoughts are helpful to us as we plan. So thank you.
Before I call on others who have comments or questions, I just wanted to share a couple thoughts that I had as I looked at this, and that is, number one, I'm struck by the fact that on the one hand, our budget often is built, well, it isn't often, it is built from the bottom up, starting with the campuses and the colleges. And so which in some senses seems to me to be at odds with or in tension with what we're trying to do in terms of encouraging multidisciplinary endeavors, as we talked about earlier today in mission and fulfillment. And that was number one, that they seem to be not working hand in hand, or that the way we build our budget isn't really designed to incentivize multidisciplinary endeavors. The second comment I had, it touches on actually another presentation we had on enterprise risk management that you raised, for example, when a professor leaves who drives a lot of revenue coming in, other revenue, that's a loss, and then it has to be made up. And it occurred to me that there is an example of where that actually jeopardizes the enterprise, at least on a short-term basis. And so I'm struck by how all of these different topics that we've heard about today, how they're intertwined with each other, but and also how they could be at odds with each other. And I'm not sure I'm looking for a response. If you have one, that'd be great, but I at least wanted to share my observations that as we go through building a budget, how it touches on these other very important topics as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair Mayron. I don't have a complete answer for you other than to tell you that we are aware of all these kinds of decisions, and all these issues come up frequently. And as we develop the budget, and over the years, I've certainly been a part of conversations about a lot of them. If you take the multidisciplinary issue as an example, that has been, I remember coming in the early 90s and having that be an issue that leadership was discussing at the time. How can we increase interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work that existed, way back then, 30 years ago? And so we obviously haven't got it completely figured out in that time. But I will tell you that I think there is enough flexibility in our budgeting system and the way that we pull things together to influence things like that. So if it was a priority to influence and incentivize multidisciplinary activity, we can work within what we have and create ideas to do that. I mean, we're not prohibited from it. It's just we have to create the priority and then create some solutions around that within the budget. So we're happy to work on those types of things, and whatever comes through the process as we work with the units and understand the issues that everybody is facing and what the university goals are, which drives the whole thing. Because even though we build, I just want to make this last point, I guess, when we build the budget from the bottom up, we're doing so within the context of university direction. So we are giving the priorities and the direction to the units as they do their planning. And so it isn't completely, each unit by itself is on its own. They're all working collectively toward the university priorities. And it's our job to try to pull that together in a way that makes sense in the budget. So we try.
All right, thank you, thank you. Let me go on then to others who wanted to speak. Next up is Chair Powell.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Mayron. So a comment really, and starting with an observation that I think that it will be particularly challenging to pull it all together this year for at least two reasons. One is inflation. We've heard some very high numbers, seen them over the last couple of months. I think at the Federal Reserve commentary yesterday, they said it would be a little over 4% this year all in. I think it'll go down a little bit next year to maybe 3%. That's not 6, but it's still a lot. And it's more than we've seen in a long time, and they are worried about it. So I think inflation is definitely here. There's a labor shortage, and that I think we're seeing everywhere across the country, which my understanding is we're already seeing elevated turnover here, but we're seeing it everywhere as the competition for talent starts to really kick in, and people are leaving to make more money. So there are, those two alone, I think, are going to make it tough. But with that as background, I'll offer my own goals for what I hope we can accomplish as we work our way through this process. And I will tell you that these are admittedly contradictory and in conflict with one another, but I'll give them to you anyway. I think the first one is I continue to think we should do everything we can to minimize tuition increases. And even in an inflationary environment, that should be a very, very high focus of ours collectively, and I know we will do that. At the same time, I think we have to maintain competitive salaries if we want to be effective. So, and I know that those are two sort of opposing forces, but budgets, it's hard to do budgets, and we have to do both of those. I hope and trust that we're going to maintain significant work against reallocation and peak and administrative cost efficiency. We've done that, really well over the last couple of years, and I just think that that will continue to be a critical component of how this all comes together. And I think we continue to identify opportunities. That's going to be a key part of this. I'd like to, at some point, understand, how the really outstanding performance of our investment managers, both here and in the foundation, which has resulted in, really significant endowment growth, how that's going to translate over the next few years into, more support for operating funds for the university, because I think could be another key element, and I'll be looking to see that. And finally, again, these are just my own priorities. I think investments in enrollment growth are really important for us for a lot of reasons. Number one, revenue is good. And to the degree that, we get that through the kind of support that we talked about earlier in this meeting, or increased investment in direct marketing to students. And there's a bunch of ways to do it, but I'm hoping that we see those investments in the plan and in ways where we can count on, more enrollment. So anyway, for what it's worth, that's how I'm looking at it. I'm sure everybody else we all have our own set of priorities, but for what it's worth, that's what I'll be looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Paul. Any comments, Vice President Tonneson?
No, again, other than thank you very much. It's helpful to hear priorities.
Thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and some of my points have been made, and might be a little bit of an echo here, but I think slides on 222 and 225 are really important slides to look at. Regent McMillan had pointed out 222, and there's a lot of hard realities that there are not a lot of places to go in looking at balancing a budget. And then when we jump to the slide with the input on 226, we have to cut and we have to invest both. And I think the place really to look at in that on the cost side is the magnitude of investments on the strategic plan initiatives. I think we really have to prioritize Impact 2025 because other things will have some fall in place. It won't take care of it all, but the example today in our legislative request on expanding the Promise program, I think is an example of using the strategic plan to leverage our budget balancing areas, I guess, and maybe leveraging the piece in there about the business industry support. Our President Gabel has made major inroads with our business community, the Minnesota Business Partnership, the Chamber, and just as an example, how do we leverage that into some of that maybe Promise program or such. But I think that speaks to going directly to the strategic plan, and that's the backbone to our budget exercises, I think. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Regent Davenport. Regent McMillan, you wanted to, you had a second comment, I believe. Oh, are you going to pass?
Yeah, no. Thank you, Regent or Chair Mayron. we're kind of all over the map here in the enrollment conversation that wanted to just pick up on something that Regent Rocha said. As a net exporter of students in a state that's known for the quality of its K-12 education process with a declining regional demographic, why we continue to hobble along with a very challenging reciprocity system absolutely befuddles me. And I'm looking over at my friend and colleague, Regent Swigum, who more than a decade ago in this room told me that it's impossible to change. I do think that if we're going to look at system-wide enrollment strategy, reworking, somehow we got to get that on the table too, because it works as a disadvantage to this institution. And it works as a disadvantage to us as a state when we try and keep kids in state. There's tuition, there's all kinds of other variables too, but I, for one, cannot see anything, not anything, but I don't see much, I see way more negative out of that than positive. And now I see in the news that Wisconsin is jiggering theirs and doing something to theirs to give individual campuses more opportunity to compete for our students. So I think the days of walking past reciprocity as being too hard to change we got to somehow get that into the play here and onto the playing field rather. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Langworthy, any other individuals who wish to weigh in?
Chair Mayron, Regent Rocha has his hand up.
All right, Regent Rocha, why don't you bring us home?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'll just strongly support the comments that Regent McMillan just made. I think that's long overdue. I appreciate him raising that. My question was I'd like to ask a question that may or may not be addressed today, but if we could get it, when we made the major shift as an institution, the Twin Cities campus anyway, from a overwhelmingly commuter campus to a now strong residential campus, one of the things that we didn't plan, I don't expect enough, was the development of a dorm system, a large enough dorm system. As I understand, we have the fewest dorm beds per student in the conference. My question is this: I know some institutions actually generate some substantial revenue through their dormitory services and even perhaps food services. To the extent we were to increase enrollment and were we to establish more dormitory opportunities on the Twin Cities campus, would that give us the possibility or the prospect of generating revenue for many of our peers who, we've turned over a tremendous amount of property and relied heavily on private sector development of housing, but which of course we don't reap any financial rewards from that. It's good for our students to have access to those opportunities. But if we were to have more dorm opportunities, would that be a potential source of auxiliary revenue for the university?
Vice President Tonneson, are you able to answer that question, or do you need to find a friend?
I see that Senior Vice President Franz is raising his hand. We'd like to answer that question.
All right, Senior Vice President Franz.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, and thank you, Regent Rocha. One of the issues, obviously, to engage in more student housing requires investment too. So it's a trade-off of both engaging in that capital investment and making sure that we have the assets to invest more in that kind of housing. But there is always that trade-off. And I think one of the things that the trade-off that's happened over the last 20 years has been we've allowed the private sector in many ways to make that investment and provide the housing. And to the extent we want to change that, and some of the, as you'll see in the campus plan that was approved earlier today, some of the envisioning of the campus going forward does deal with the opportunity to increase housing. So it's clear that the increasing dormitory housing will provide more auxiliary revenues. That's obvious. And so I think the key is, do we want to make that investment? When do we want to make that investment? And how can we make that consistent with what the private sector is doing, so we don't compete with the private sector, you know what I mean? And really develop some alternatives. But clearly that would increase auxiliary service or revenue.
All right.
Madam Chair, thank you, Vice President Franz. It takes an investment, but it's an investment that's paid off the students that use it. And once you get to that point, I think there's some real benefits beyond that. And we also know that it provides safety and security benefits, as Chief Clark identified it as the safest form of housing for our students. So I would just emphasize that would be something that I would like to see us pursue, move up in the timeline as much as we possibly can as we go forward. Thank you.
All right, any further comments, questions by anyone? All right, hearing none, thank you very much, Vice President Tonneson. That was an excellent presentation, and hopefully you got some additional thoughts and with the comments that were made by the various people around the table and in Zoom.
I did. Thank you very much. I took notes. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. All right, at this time, that brings us to the revised consent report. First, Senior Vice President Franz, will you summarize the items in today's revised consent report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 4 items I'd like to point out in the consent report of particular interest or revisions that have been made. And the first one is the purchase of goods and services. You will see a proposal for an amended contract for Huron for peak services, contract services from January 1, 2022 through September 30, 2022. Tomorrow at the full board meeting, Vice President Horstman, Managing Director Andrew Laws from Huron, and myself will provide the board with an update on the new peak activity and initiatives that we'll be engaged in the next phase for which this purchase agreement is proposed. Second, you will note there are 3 coaching contracts up for review. The head coach for women's volleyball, as well as the offensive and defensive coordinators for football, have been included in your package. Third, we also have the report on expense patterns of public higher education institutions. This report is in response to 4 specific questions put in legislation during the 2020 session. Now, the responses are due from both Minnesota State and the university by January 2022. And requires board approval before we submit it to the state. Therefore, it's in the consent report. I just want to point out that this is different from the cost definition and benchmarking report that's in the information items. That the cost and definition benchmarking report is an annual report that we provide to this board at this time every year that helps categorize and explain our total expenditures for the last fiscal year. Now, we use portions of the cost definition and benchmarking report to answer some of the, one of the 4 legislative questions, but these are 2 separate items. I just wanted to point that out in your review. And fourth, I want to point out that the request for board approval of 2 additional personal holidays, subject to the board's approval, the university would grant faculty and staff 2 additional personal holidays to be used at their discretion between December 2021 and June 30, 2022. This request for additional vacation days is one way the university can recognize the hard work and commitment of our university faculty and employees who have responded to the challenges of COVID-19, all while working additional hours and accepting involuntary pay reductions and furloughs. The university is extremely grateful for the dedication and sacrifices for the university and the genesis for the recommendation in your consent report. Those are the items I wanted to highlight, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz. Before I invite a motion to recommend approval of the consent report, this would be the time if anyone has any questions or would like to make a comment or would like to separate out an item from the report to bring that up. I do understand Regent Farnsworth, you've got some questions that you wanted to ask.
Yes, thanks, Chair Mayron. No request to separate, but just comments and a question on 2 things. One on the coaching contracts. Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz, for teeing that item up a little bit. Not so much a question about why it's here and understanding that these items come in front of this board, but this is more of a note for a future conversation of wanting to understand a little bit more around how it gets here in terms of our strategic approach when it comes to compensation and contract terms. Wanting to understand more, not about 2 examples. In one of the coaching contracts, we have some annual supplemental pay. It's clear from the contract what annual supplemental pay is. but wanting to kind of understand how we get to that or get to that contract term in certain contracts. Another example is the 23.1% increase for our defensive coordinator for Go for Football. Again, understanding what it is, but wanting to understand, from a strategic and kind of approaching lens, how we get to an increase like that. So as we all know, athletics is important to our institution, which is fantastic. And sometimes, there are challenges with that, and that can generate conversation. So those would be my 2 points on that. Just really wanting to increase my understanding as a member of this board who sees employment agreement amendments like this. The second thing is on the personal holiday proposal. I just want to say I think that's fantastic and really important for us to do, and want to thank President Gable and everyone who brought this forward. I have nothing but good things to say about it, but just felt really strongly as a member of this board wanted to acknowledge it. And it's something very tangible that we can approve today. That's will be a positive for our staff and faculty. I'm here at the university in recognition of the tremendous sacrifices and challenges that folks have had to deal with throughout this pandemic. So wanted to particularly note that and thank the administrative team for bringing that forward. The first 2 points were just more of notes for later. A response is fine if there is one, but certainly don't need one today. So thank you.
And just to clarify, then you don't have any specific questions. They were more comments that you wanted to make. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair Mayron. Thank you.
All right, Chair Powell, apparently you would like to make a comment or have a question.
Oh, thanks, Chair Mayron. I have a question, and it goes to the annual financial report. And Senior Vice President Franz, very detailed on page, it's a big one. So the TIP fund, which performed very well this year. And I think it's, we track it with the Consolidated Endowment Fund, which also had a tremendous year. So that's sitting at a little over 2 billion now. And the TIP fund, temporary TIP fund, which has run along at about 900 million to $1 billion for many, many years now, also had a very good return. I think sits at $1.4 billion now. And so the question is, do we have guidelines, policies, rules, that govern or what should be in that TIP fund? Because the idea is that the $1 billion seem to be adequate for our fluctuations and how the cash moves through. Do we really need that much money in the fund? And do we, at what point do we take the opportunity to say, we should be putting some of that money to work? We should transfer 400 million, just in round numbers, to the Consolidated Endowment Fund and start to get a return and start to return that to operating funds. So I guess the question is, are there rules governing that TIP fund that would allow us to make transfers to make some of that money operating support?
Madam Chair.
Before you answer, Senior Vice President Franz, let me just make a observation. I think, Chair Powell, what you're referring to is something that's part of the information items, not the consent agenda.
Oh, am I in my information?
Yeah, I think they are.
I beg your pardon.
That said, if Senior Vice President Franz would like to respond to that, even though that's not what's on the table right now, by all means, go ahead and do so.
I apologize. Thank you, Chair Mayron.
I would like to, Madam Chair, and thank you. I think, first of all, on the information items, you hit one of the recommended reading items I was going to make for the board for the holiday season, is that report. Because, it truly is one of the must reads. But I think the key here is that you're right, that you do need to reset and analyze what those amounts are. And I see that my good friend, Associate Vice President Mike Volna, can give you some indications of how we've been doing that and what we are going to do going forward.
So thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz. Chair Mayron, Regent Powell, there are some policies around the administrative policies around what we classify as TIP and how we use it. And there are some investment policies around what we invest that in. Currently, I do believe a portion of TIP is invested in the Consolidated Endowment Fund to maximize some of those returns. the Office of Investments and Banking does go through and sort of determine what our core needs are for reserves and what we do with that versus what we do with things that exceed core. It's important to remember, though, that especially as you've noticed in the last year and a half, TIP really does represent the immediate liquid reserves of the institution. And when Julia sat up here and talked, Vice President Tonneson sat up here and talked about using reserves and balances to help balance the budget during the pandemic, it's those TIP balances which are ascribed and accounted for by each unit that she's talking about. So that's what's really important when you think about how you invest it is, what is the risk and likelihood that you might need that reserve and have to apply it at a unit by unit level.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Regent Rocha, you had your hand up for a comment or question, or perhaps to call something out. I'm not quite sure.
Thank you, Chair Mayron. No, I'm not calling anything specific up. I would like to ask a couple questions. Going back to the salaries for the athletics coaches, start with a comment followed by a question, if I can, of Director Coyle. So I don't consider, when I think about the athletics coaches, I don't perceive them in the public service realm in the same way as the vast majority of the core mission folks at the university, because there's a pretty strong market-driven component. For instance, our football team, when I look at the coordinator contracts, the football team, I understand about $31 million more than that program costs, and that's really important because it provides the support for our other athletics programs and reduces the amount of subsidy that would come from the institution generally to offer sports. And so when I get a fairly substantial increase for one of the coordinators, I'm interested in a bit of the sort of the methodology or the thought process in that. I presume it's because maintaining that consistency and the success that has come from that position, the role of that position, that will yield a better result for us that ultimately has a financial impact. And our athletics in the past, I know that there's been a general fund subsidy for athletics that I think really comes from the historic state special, if I recall, as sports became brought to be on par with what had been traditional men's sports. But that raises, then there's the question with respect to the volleyball coaches contract, and this again, I think if Director Coyle can respond to this. It's there are some changes in that contract that I have a couple questions about, but in terms of just simply the sort of the size and the structure of that contract, I understand that volleyball actually runs at a $3 million or so loss. It has a gross revenue of something in the $700,000 range. And so when you have a contract of this size, which, and again, these are fairly high profile contracts, again, the presumption is perhaps there's enough revenue generated by having the success and the consistency of the program that it reduces the amount of subsidy. I'm just kind of interested in what Director Coyle's again, thought process and methodology is in coming with the terms of this. And then just the more specific questions on the volleyball contract. It appears that the previous contract had, it was a little bit more backloaded for the purpose of inducing the Coach McCutcheon to stay. This one has a little bit less of that. I'm interested in a little bit of what the thought process is with that, and also the restrictions on departure were broader and sort of more protective of the university, a wider category of positions where he would have a larger buyout obligation, whereas this contract has a narrower description that would seem to make it a little bit easier to depart in with a much smaller buyout. And I would just ask Director Coyle if he could maybe comment on those points.
All right, I'm thinking that Athletic Director Coyle is at the Horseshoe, but from where I'm sitting in Zoom, oh, all right, I could only see his back, now I can see his face. All right, Athletic Director Coyle, if you could respond to Regent Rocha's question.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair Myron and Regent Rocha. Thank you for the question. And I'll try to answer it. That was a long question, so I want to make sure I follow you. So there's no doubt with Coach McCutcheon, obviously all of you are aware of his success. He has taken us to multiple Final Fours. We just were competing in the Elite Eight last weekend and had a chance to go to the Final Four this weekend in Columbus, Ohio. And in full transparency, when I arrived here almost 6 years ago, we did a new contract with Coach McCutcheon. His contract was nearing the end of his term. And you are right, sir, in his current agreement, we had retention payments in there at the end of his terms because I felt it was very important that we keep him locked in here. He has now finished his 10th year as our head coach. And so as Julie Manning and myself negotiated this new contract with Hugh, we removed that retention bonus because he has been here 10 years. The salary stayed flat with a 2.5% escalator, which keeps him, he's paid probably in the top 4 or 5 in the country. But I would argue his success academically and athletically warrants that payment and the exposure that he brings not only to our athletic program and our volleyball program, but our university when his team's competing on national TV.
All right, do you want to, I think then there was a question regarding the other athletic contract. Am I correct, Regent Rocha, or was the question only for Coach McCutcheon?
And Chair Mayron, thank you. It was kind of a broader, thank you for that answer, Director Coyle. It's helpful. It's, for me, it's important when we talk about the values that you were just describing, nice to understand what that, what the cost of that is. If it's not generating revenue, then we know that by having a larger salary, these expectations are the qualities that you just described. But the first question was sort of the methodology. When you look at these sizable, high profile contracts, how do you make that adjustment within the context of balancing a budget? Because obviously every dollar is precious to the institution, and so when you make because we have a lot of employees that are going to would say they'd love a raise of that size. How do we respond to that with respect to the very competitive market-driven components? Obviously coordinators are always candidates for head coaching jobs that pay a lot of money. And so keeping your coordinators is the value, but I'm interested in your thought on that.
Athletic Director Coyle.
Yeah, Chair Mayron and Regent Rocha, thank you for the second question. So with respect to Joe Rossi, you are correct. We took his salary. He was at $650,000. And if you recall, when this board approved the contract extension for PJ, maybe a month ago, or I can't remember the exact timing of that board meeting, when we approved the contract extension, part of that contract extension for Coach Fleck included a $350,000 salary adjustment for assistant coaches. And our defense is ranked nationally at the top this year. What Coach Rossi's done on that side of the ball for our program has obviously been very instrumental in our success over the past several years. And I can tell you, I understand going from 650 to 800,000 is a big salary difference. We had a peer in the Big Ten hire an AD at 1.8 or 1.9 million this week. So he, again, is still, I think, 8th or 9th in the league in pay for his position. But again, we feel like that was an investment we needed to continue to have that continuity, to continue to build our football program. And as you know, sir, as you noted in your comments, our football program generates a net of about $32 million, which obviously helps fund all of our programs.
Thank you very much. Regent McMillan, you had a comment question?
Yeah, I think one of both. And let me start with the question. And I don't think I want this item pulled out, but I'm on page 231 and looking at the ratification of additional personal holidays. I need a little more information to get comfortable with how I'm going to vote on that before, and maybe the answer to the question will include whether I ask to separate it. But that, as Regent Farnsworth said, is extremely well-intentioned, and I think for many of our employee categories for all of our employees, well-deserved. But I'm curious how that was consulted with faculty specifically, and how faculty responded, because some of the feedback I'm getting is that it's not as perhaps meaningful to them and impossible to utilize. So I'm just curious if somebody can give me a little sense of that. I'm not sure who would do that, Provost Croson or someone else, or I don't see Vice President Horstman here, but.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Regent McMillan, Vice President Horstman is in negotiations today and could not be here today. So if Provost Croson could help, that'd be great.
All right, Provost Croson, do you want to tackle that question? And then it
Thank
sounds
you,
like Regent McMillan, you have another question as well after that. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair Mayron, Regent McMillan. Indeed, we've We've had quite a number of discussions with FCC leadership, with individual faculty members about this idea. On the one hand, for all employees, we are offering these 2 extra days. We are not taking work off of their plate, right, in order to enjoy them. And so that is a challenge, I think, across the board. Faculty, even especially those on 9-month, even those on 9-month calendars, do accrue and spend vacation days, but they don't typically record them the same way that staff do. And so for many faculty who are held to particular standards about teaching, about research, right, about deliverables, they don't keep track of their time in the same way. So for some faculty, they may feel like this is not as much of a relief than others. On the other hand, I think everybody understands the benefits for all employees and the recognition that this is designed to create.
Thank you, Provost Croson. That gets to the heart of it. I do not want to separate that item out, then you can leave it in. Thank you.
All right. Did you have another question, Regent McMillan?
Yeah, this is a comment, and I don't. Let me see how to phrase this. Regent Rocha a minute ago spoke quite passionately about his view of markets and salaries, and I just want to be sure that it's understood. I don't share that view. I don't know how others around the board feel. This may not be the right time to get into it, but markets are markets, and we ignore markets, or we differentiate markets, or we segregate markets at tremendous risk to the talent that we bring in here to lead, whether it's our football team, our neurosurgery department, our university, and I just can't support what I heard Regent Rocha say. That said, that's the only reason I'm raising it. I didn't want that to be left at that point. I'm not asking to pull anything out. I'm just making a comment. Enough. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Regent Powell, I believe you're the last person who has a comment or question.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to, in part echo what Regent McMillan just said, but which just to sort of underscore that all of our schools and all of our higher education units, all of them compete for students. They compete for faculty. They compete for philanthropic dollars. These are hyper competitive enterprises. And as we saw from Senior Vice President Tonneson's presentation, I mean, there are students going to different states, and they can go to the Carlson School of Business, or they can go to Kellogg. I mean, it's highly competitive. In fact, this is one of the largest and most competitive industries in the country. And so these schools compete. They depend primarily on the tuition revenue that they get from the students that they're able to attract. Some run a surplus, some run a deficit. And just like within the athletic program, they have ticket revenue. They also have philanthropy. They have license revenue. And athletics, like a number of our departments, they also run a deficit, and we have to subsidize them. And we cover $130 million in debt and indebtedness in that program. So I see them all as being part of a very competitive enterprise, competing for talent and students. And in my view, just to pick the head coach's salary, I mean, that was a very competitive market-based analysis, and we put him right in the middle of the market, and that worked really well. But there was very sound reasoning for why we did what we did there, totally market-based. And I just think it's important that we remember that as we approach these contracts.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've now covered any questions, comments, or any desire to separate out items. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the consent report?
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. The motion is approved. Is there, let's see, I think that covers the consent, and now we move to information items. At this time, I will call upon Senior Vice President Franz to address the information items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to just point out a couple of reports already mentioned by Regent Powell, one of them on terms of the annual financial report and the results of our endowment. We also have in the report, in the information section, the annual report on targeted business, community, economic development, and small business programs. This report summarizes the university efforts to actively use businesses owned and operated by minorities, women, and people with disabilities in construction projects and other contracts for goods and services. An important report that I want to point out for you. And lastly, I want to point out that we provide an update on the issuance of our commercial paper for our operating loan to the Department of Athletics on the Twin Cities campus to cover their fiscal year 2021 cash shortfall because of the budget impacts of COVID-19. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I wanted to emphasize at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Senior Vice President Franz. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.